Good morning. Welcome back to another installment of 2021 California Seth Conference. Our first speaker this morning is Richard Gentle. Now, he's based in the UK as well, and he was introduced to Nature of Personal Reality back in 1987. And before that, he spent a good long 9 years studying all kinds of spiritual faiths and traditions and being a seeker, and mostly in the Indian and Tibetan tradition. Now, he investigated topics such as astral projection and reincarnation, healing, and metaphysics. But it wasn't until reading the Seth material that he finally discovered an authenticity and breadth that was truly second to none, a truly profound knowledge. And it was largely, to his surprise, unfiltered by human personal beliefs and cultural values. It was very, very pure. So he began to write about his experiences, and he self published his first work titled How We Perform Negative Miracles, a very captivating title. And more books followed, actually, too many to list here. Richard, he lives his daily life with Seth, ever present in his day to day life. Now, his main strength, as he says, is to see the bigger picture rather than to get fixated exclusively on small areas of interest. Now, he has a saying that says, everyone has a piece of the puzzle, no matter their position or status in life. In 2000, Richard worked at Starlab, and there he explored serendipity and other aspects of metaphysics. In 2011, he gave a talk at a Starlab reunion in Barcelona that in 2012 became one of his books, Quantum Mass Superstructures, Creating the World You Experience. Sounds very Sethian to me. Now on social media, you can find him at facebook.com/Richard Gentle, and then the same for the website, richardgentle.com. And today, Richard will be speaking on Living Seth, Developing Your Own Truth. So we're very excited to have him here. And so let's give him a warm welcome to our etheric, to our virtual stage.
Hello, I'm Richard Gentle, and I'm going to talk about Living Seth, Developing Your Own Truth. This talk is about understanding how beliefs about reality affect the way we view truth and relate to one another. I will look at the nature of personal reality with respect to taking personal responsibility, questioning our beliefs more often, tuning into framework 2, and improving our physical experience through a better understanding of time in our spacious present. I apologise occasionally for referring to notes, but I will be quoting directly from Seth and need to read Seth's words exactly as they were spoken. Some quotes may be removed from their original work's context, but as most of you can appreciate, Seth's words often apply to more than one situation. Lastly, I'd like you to know that I cannot cover every nuance of what I am going to discuss in absolute detail. So my intention is to present you with a flavour of my thinking. Also, my commentary between the quotes is only my beliefs in the present moment. I've divided the content roughly into 7 areas: the problem of accepting self-responsibility, the holding place of physical experience, connectivity, individual and collective beliefs about reality, a false interpretation of physical feedback, the spacious present, linear time in your spacious present, and then I finish with some suggestions. So let's take the first one, the problem of accepting self-responsibility. Well, you can't blame other people anymore, can you, and other things. On a personal responsibility note, Seth says, I want you to realize the responsibility for your life and your environment is your own. If you believe otherwise, then you are limited. Your environment then represents the sum total of knowledge and experience. And this brings us on to accountability. Not only ours, of course, but other people, things and circumstances. From childhood learning experiences, both at home and in formal education, we're often encouraged to look for the origin of our strife in other people and circumstances. For we are trained that with accountability there is cost. And of course we don't want to be the one paying. Seth says, sometimes you blame others, your own background or a previous life, if you accept reincarnation. You may hold God or the devil responsible, or you may simply say, that is life, and accept the negative experience as a necessary portion of your lot. You may finally come to a half understanding of the nature of reality and wail, I believe that I have caused these ill effects, but I find myself unable to reverse them. If this is the case, then regardless of what you have told yourself thus far, you still do not believe that you are the creator of your own experience. As soon as you recognize this fact, you can begin at once to alter those conditions that cause you dismay or dissatisfaction. And of course, as adults, we may build on this in other ways, such as explaining away our lack of understanding or incredulity with conspiracy theories. Someone is making us do something or contriving against us. Seth reassures us to some extent by saying, no one forces you to think in any particular manner. In the past, you may have learned to consider things pessimistically. You may believe that pessimism is more realistic than optimism. The nature of personal reality session. You may even suppose, and many do, that sorrow is ennobling, a sign of deep spiritualism, a mark of apartness, a necessary mental garb of saints and poets. Nothing could be further from the truth. Of course, we also point to external sources to blame when it comes to our personal health, but if you're a Seth follower, then you understand this next statement of Seth's. Any physical ailment is symbolic of an inner reality or statement. Your entire life is a statement in physical terms, written upon time as you understand it. I'm just going to move on now to the holding place of physical experience. We're given a stability of purpose in the physical realm with a sense of linear time and space, albeit a false one. We chose to be present in this realm, and although in the beginning we drifted in and out of it, like constantly dipping our toe in the water, we eventually firmed up our experience to gain more presence and a fuller engagement. Seth says, the race also realizes well the advantages and disadvantages of the physical reality it has adopted. It knows, for example, that there is a tendency to go to extremes. Those within the system know this. Regardless of what you may think of their present performance at any given time, in quotes, it is from this system that the greatest potentials emerge. For having dealt with it, consciousness undergoes one of the severest tests in learning to handle its own energy. The horror and the results of mismanagement and the vulnerability are the teaching methods that each consciousness has accepted before entering your system. There is no way out but to learn or to ruin the entire system. In no other field of reality are the terms so drastic. For this reason, the inner self withholds much of its knowledge. There must be no leaning upon the very basic fact that behind and within the system there is relief. You must believe in the physical reality and accept the vulnerability. So if we look at connectivity and the individual and collective beliefs about reality, relationship with others in this physical environment, having seemingly separated from the comfort of all that is, becomes important to us, and as part of that desire for connection, we adopt views which resonate with who we are, provide us with a sense of belonging, and offer us a sense of stability and security. However, we have to consider some implications of relationship and connection. Seth says, the words you speak to someone else are in certain terms broken down by the listener to basic components and understood at different levels. As if by example, Seth suggests an exercise for us. Now, I want each of you to examine the feeling. Hold the feeling while you listen to me, but remember to hold the feeling, for they are the connections, these feelings, with parallel selves. Often our sense of what is true is a reflection of the majority and our immediate societal structures, regardless of truths agreed upon in historical memory. An example of this might be acceptable behaviour, so something perhaps in the past that would have just been done and accepted. Now, in our lifetime experience, some of those things are no longer acceptable. Sometimes the mass truth of others is not our own, or stops resonating with who we are and the deeper understanding we are developing. But what of questioning the beliefs we hold? How do we root out those which are false or detrimental to our ongoing and individual personal development? Should we adopt the techniques of psychoanalysts and psychologists such as Jung and Freud? Seth says, there is no need to search endlessly into the past of this life or any other for the original causes of beliefs. Making a change in the present or a certain kind will automatically alter the beliefs across the board, so to speak. You will react to your beliefs habitually, often unthinkingly, and in usual ideas of time and in your experience of it. You must allow yourself some time to change that habitual behaviour. I often say that remember that a belief is just a thought you keep acting on. Some people have said in the past that a belief is just a thought you keep thinking, but it's not just about thinking, it's actually acting on those thoughts. The physical feedback extension of ourself becomes an absolute for most people. Seth says, as long as you believe your environment to be objective and independent of yourself, then to a large extent you feel powerless to change it, to see beyond it, or to imagine other alternatives that may be less apparent. So let's look at a false interpretation of physical feedback. I call it physical feedback because it is the idea construction made manifest as objective solidity. The mistake we make is to see our physical feedback as something which is outside of ourselves. We focus our attention through the limitations of our physically orientated senses, or as we call them, the five senses. The tendency is always to build on what we have already created by default. All well and good if it's something we like. So let's look at the spacious present. Time has almost become a taboo word among Seth followers. We all acknowledge the concept of a timeless universe, but like the past arguments in science over whether light travels in waves or particles, we discover that it can do both without contradiction. The same is true of time in the spacious presence. When you factor in a physically experienced realm. When we first come across Seth's spacious present, we might connect it with his other statement of our point of power being in the present. But what is the present, particularly as it relates to our physical reality experience? Seth actually alludes to the notion that our experience of our present is actually a result of our past focus made manifest. He says, during your life, any event must come through your creaturehood, with the built-in time recognition that is so largely a part of your neurological structure. So usually there is a lag, a lapse in time, during which your beliefs cause material actualization. When you try to change your convictions in order to change your experience, you also have to first stop the momentum that you have already built up, so to speak. You are changing the messages while the body is used to reacting smoothly, unquestioningly to a certain set of beliefs. So we effectively experience our past as our now time. To change this, we must see our future as if it is our present. But usually we take our present and project that forward. I used to think that the spacious present was every moment of now, but it seems that our mass event, humans on Earth experience of the spacious present, is all the duration of time we appear to be experiencing and aware of. You might say that our spacious present spans about 4.543 billion years of physicality. Seth says, in actuality, there is only a spacious present, so spacious that it cannot be explored all at once in your terms, hence your arbitrary division of it into larger rooms of past, present and future. And he goes on. Again, there is only the spacious present. You are in the spacious present now, you are in the spacious present in your yesterday, and you still will be and not have travelled through it in your tomorrow or even in eons of tomorrows. So the present is indeed the point of power, because this is our access to the spacious present. Seth says, in the spacious present, as it exists in actuality beyond shadow, all things that have existed still exist, and all things that shall exist in your tomorrow already do exist. You, on your plane, cannot experience such reality, except in a very limited manner, and you cannot experience such reality spontaneously. The spontaneity is the quality of the spacious present. To you, with your ideas of camouflage time, this material may sound strange and unbelievable. Seth also tells us that we have a spacious mind. He says, a certain kind of affirmation of self allows the brain to tune into these more spacious methods of perception that are the natural characteristics of the mind. You will not use your spacious mind until you affirm its reality within yourself, and until you are ready to handle the additional data, which will then become consciously available to one extent or another. But the spacious mind operates through your creaturehood. In your terms, it represents latent abilities of consciousness that can be more or less normal functions. And this is why I think Seth tells us to listen, not just to the audible words, but to the language of the inner self with its feelings and symbols. Seth further informs us that the spacious present is much more a vivid reality to those outside of your system. To give you an analogous, albeit three-dimensional example, imagine getting a piece of string and draping it over the arm of a big armchair. So you can see from a distance that the string goes all the way over and you can see both sides. But if you place a small ant at one end of the dangling string and you let it crawl up to the top until it stops in the middle of the string at the top of the arm, let's pretend that the ant knows where it's been and where it is now. It knows nothing of the future path of the string as it disappears over the other side of the arm and out of sight. However, from your broader overview perspective, you can see the ant's past, present, and some probable futures simultaneously. And a good place to begin is to question the information we are receiving through our physical senses. Seth has said humorously in various ways, don't believe anything I tell you. This isn't because Seth is lying to us, it's because he appreciates that at every level of awareness we are influenced by our own filtered beliefs, and a belief is just a thought you keep acting on. Seth says the answers basically are not to be found by listening to me. Although I can help you, the answers are to be found by listening to the inner voice within yourself. Your heartbeat has more to tell you than any philosopher's word if you once listen to them and feel what they say. Seth also makes it clear that he isn't with us as a troubleshooter, but more of a reminder of the resources we have available to us. He says, my purpose is not to solve your problems for you, but to put you in touch with your own power. My purpose is not to come between you and your own freedom by giving you answers, even to the most tragic of problems. My purpose is to reinforce your own strength, for ultimately the magic of your being is well equipped to help you find fulfillment, understanding, exuberance, and peace. Let's face it, there comes a time when you have to stop running from teacher to teacher and start putting your knowledge and understanding into practice in your daily living. Of course, we sometimes lose momentum or stray from the course, and it's helpful to have a boost from our favourite mentors. Since Seth once said in Personal Session 3, I know that you can grow tired, however, and that sometimes a gift of energy can be quite a boost. So again, with this, I send my joyful recognition of your existence and energy that you can use to reinforce your own vitality and strength. A further example of Seth's position in relation to teaching us was to say, now, I am not trying to tell you what to do. I am trying to release the portion of you that knows playfully what to do. And this is also a recurring theme, that we often try too hard and push against things too hard. And one of the things that we are often told to do is to be more playful, not to worry so much as to outcomes. Anyway, to give us some hope that we are all striving and it's indeed attainable, Seth adds, my message to the reader will be, basically, you are no more of a physical personality than I am, and in telling you of my reality, I tell you of your own. Seth often asks us to listen, as I've mentioned, but not to his words, to our own inner voice, our true self of framework 2, where we have access to a bigger picture and links to our multidimensional personality and parallel selves. And if you're not familiar with this, think initially in terms of your gut feeling or your intuitive feelings, regardless of mental rationalizing or external physical world stimuli. When I write my own books, I often put ideas together in small, easy to read chunks in a very concise manner. And I'm very careful about the way I write the words, so that as they're read, they create connections in the mind between the words. To repeat Seth once again, the answers basically are not to be found by listening to me, although I can help you. The answers are to be found by listening to the inner voice within yourself. And in saying this, Seth acknowledges that the true depth of his message to us cannot be conveyed in the form of limited verbal language alone. But what he can do is arrange the language we have available to trigger an understanding within each of us, which is why I believe it's important to preserve Seth's quotes as originally given. Sometimes when we reread our Seth materials, we gain new insights, sometimes wondering how we managed to miss something, now so obvious, on our previous occasion of reading that particular chapter. If you remember, there were lots of occasions when, as Seth was communicating through Jane as Rupert, he often used to say that he had communicated with her at other levels, and she herself often said that she'd received information in addition and separate to the information that was being delivered to her classes. And once you begin to see the results of this approach gaining momentum in your own life, you can stop living in reverse. And as you see the results of your changed approach in physical feedback, it's so much easier to attract more of what you are seeing and experiencing in positive feeling ways. I've often found that, if we are looking at the world that we've got around us and not very happy with it, there's a tendency to build on that. And this is why in meditation often people shut their eyes, they shut out the physical stimuli of the world that is there so strongly in front of them. And they actually start to see in their mind's eye something of the world that they want the world to be, as if it already exists now. And once you actually get this into practice and you start creating more of the things that you desire in your life, and you see them actually coming into physical manifestation around you in your environment, you then look at those and think, well, I can build on that. That's really great. I'll have more of that. So rather than worrying about something and drawing something towards you don't want, you're suddenly seeing things that you really like. And it's so much easier once you start to manifest positively to carry on manifesting in that kind of a way. Seth actually puts it this way, because Seth, being as succinct as he is, change your beliefs and you change your material circumstances. And as quoted earlier, there is no need to search endlessly into the past of this life or any other for the original causes of beliefs. Making a change in the present of a certain kind will automatically alter all beliefs across the board, so to speak. You react to your beliefs habitually, often unthinking, and in usual ideas of time and in your experience of it. You must allow yourself some time to change that habitual behavior. So you can see here that he says, that we react to our habitual beliefs, or beliefs habitually, whichever way you like to look at it. And of course, if you're starting to create things that you like, they become your new habitual beliefs. So it gets easier. A friend of mine used to say, if you can't change your situation, change your attitude. Seth says, you cannot stay within a physical condition you consider hopeless and not change it, and expect any kind of creativity or help. You must either accept the situation wholeheartedly or reject it. This is another reason why we are often told that we should take some kind of an action towards our new beliefs, to show that they are starting to actually become our current beliefs, and that they are going to manifest in our reality. So linear time in your spacious present. Seth says, during your life, any event must come through your creaturehood with the built-in time recognition that is so largely a part of your neurological structures. So usually there is a lag, a lapse in time during which your beliefs cause material actualization. When you try to change your convictions in order to change your experience, you also have to first stop the momentum that you have already built up, so to speak. You are changing the messages while the body is used to reacting smoothly, unquestioningly to a certain set of beliefs. He goes on to say, the important lessons have never really appeared in your societies. The most beneficial use of the directed will with great expectations, and that coupled with the knowledge of framework 1 and 2 activities. And as you know, as Seth readers, Seth puts a lot of onus on expectation. In fact, it seems to be one of the strongest things that he suggests for us to get into the habit of. And of course, as mentioned, this knowledge of framework 1 and 2. Just to reiterate, framework 1 is the physical experience that we're experiencing in this sort of way. Framework 2 is the non-physical, and that kind of gives us a lot of access to a lot of other information. Seth slipped in another exercise for us and says, very simply, you want something, you dwell upon it consciously for a while, you consciously imagine it coming to the forefront of probabilities, closer to your actuality. Then you drop it like a pebble into framework 2. Forget about it as much as possible for a fortnight and do this in a certain rhythm. Now, probabilities is something, again, that Seth really introduced us to in his work. And it's a vast subject, but just to give you an example of this imagining and bringing things to the forefront of probabilities. If you imagine looking out to a created space, imagine looking out into the darkness of space, and you've got various different size shapes and planets. And if you imagine some of them really sort of close up to you, and other ones very far away. So you've got lots of little dots and some of them completely disappearing into the distance. But the things that are most prominent in your thoughts and in your daily activity, these tend to be these larger probability things that are effectively closer to you. They're more in your proximity. And the thoughts that you have that are habitual thoughts, those that we said, tend to have the strongest attraction because you're acting on them all the time in various ways. Imagine those as almost like planet probabilities right in front of you. But that little idea that you might fancy an exotic holiday or a new house to live in, you'll find that possibly that is one of the small dots quite some distance away. But as you focus and you do the meditations, or you spend so much time a day really thinking and imagining that that is your lifestyle, as if you've already got it, imagining yourself maybe on that tropical island, or imagining yourself doing things around that house, the probability is brought closer to you. And with persistence, that probability becomes more and more solidified in your experience. But this idea of dropping it into framework 2, Seth often says that we should have, a nonchalant attitude towards our creating, and not to over worry about things. I liken it to, ordering something online. And when you order something online, you basically choose what you want, and you send off for it, and then you forget about it. And all you're thinking then is, you have the expectancy that it's just going to turn up in the mail and be delivered. What you don't do is ring up the supplier and start saying, well, I think that this thing I've ordered has to come via this route, and I want a particular driver to actually deliver it. Because what effectively happens is that your order was taken off the shelf and put in the van, but unfortunately that van's going on a different route. So out of the van, your order comes back on the shelf, and the next day it's the wrong driver. And you can see that this sort of interference really gets in the way. So the idea is to drop things into framework 2. Just forget it. You know that the work is going to be done, so you can actually get on with something else. Anyway, that's just a little aside. And as we change, so does everything around us, for it has to. Seth actually said to Rob and Jane, "You and Rupert have changed since our sessions began. I have also changed. Because I have changed, you have changed. And because you have changed, I have changed. And each new encounter continually changes, yet in a way that has to do with developments, not single line continuity." And this is another thing, you see. What you've got there is, initially you're thinking in terms of a sort of linear timeline, but Seth says very clearly here, it isn't a single line of continuity. This is the whole point of the spacious present. This is where everything is evolving and affecting everything else. This is why we have connection to absolutely everything in the whole universe, whether even at an atomic level. So that's what he's really saying, that it's like that small cog in a clock, a mechanical clock. It just turns a little bit and everything else moves very, very slightly. And with an understanding of the way our feeling tones colour the output of our language towards others, coupled with one another's filters in between, we can begin to see why we often observe those in physical reality as being almost equally divided in opinion on every subject known. Now, I bring this up now because we've also got our own creating of our own reality, but we also have these sort of mass event realities as well, things that resonate with us, things that we kind of tune into as part of our own being. But over the last 15 or 20 years, you've probably noticed that when anybody says anything about anything at all, you get a very equal division of somebody saying they agree with one side and somebody agreeing with the other side. And this has really kind of caused us in physical reality quite a fragmentation in societies. It's made it quite difficult for us to really get things done in a way where we all feel an element of consensus from a physical point of view. So even to give you an example, like in the UK, we've had Brexit, leaving the European Union, and that vote was very, very close. I mean, it was to within about 4%. So it was almost a 50-50 split. And this is what's happening to us. Anyway, here's a few suggestions. Before you speak or post on social media, ask yourself, how could my words be received and interpreted? I remember when I was working, I used to be quite careful when I sent emails or text to people, because I used to think to myself, if I was to read this in a different tone of voice, does it still come across in the way that I actually want it to come across? Could it be misinterpreted? Could someone actually take offense or not take me seriously? So I would read it in two different ways, a way that was sort of almost like joking and jovial, and another way that sounded a bit critical, and then adjust it accordingly. Seth says as well, because we do tend to beat ourselves up a little bit over these things. Seth says, self-disapproval is always detrimental. So it does not help, as you know, to become angry at yourself. These negative beliefs are the beliefs you are trying to combat as well. Therefore, do not be angry with yourself when you fall susceptible to beliefs that are so paramount in your world. Be thankful that you can recognize them. I think it's very important that we start to try and recognize our beliefs, and it's something that Seth always talks about. Seth also says that really all our work really is mental and psychic, and that's where we can do a lot to help ourselves. So I would say question more often. Question what you read, watch or hear, and what other people tell you. Observe the world around you and notice any anomalies that do not make sense. And I've noticed actually there are things in our physical world that suddenly don't make any sense. I think one of the greatest things that actually doesn't make any sense is water. I mean, if you think about all the properties of water, and I think anything that you sort of notice, you might just be walking down the street or something and notice something and you kind of think, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem quite right. Begin to think of the world too as cooperative rather than competitive. We've all kind of grown up with this idea, particularly in the Western world, that everything's a race, everything's about competing. It's that kind of almost, attributed to a Darwinian approach to life, looking at nature and saying, well, it's survival of the fittest, and these animals and these organisms, they battle each other for the strongest, and they breed out to the strongest animal. But actually, when you look at nature, it isn't really competitive in the way that you might think it is. It's actually very cooperative. And also, everything in nature knows what's going on. It knows its place. It knows that it may be giving itself to something else for the betterment of the whole. So it's not really thinking in terms of competition, and it's not putting those human belief filters and emotions that we carry on the things that are going on. And also Seth says that no material object of any kind is formed without the cooperation and without the inner consent of the atoms and molecules that compose it. Form is not thrust upon matter. I have an interesting story about this as well, because I read a couple of books several years ago, and they were written by a chap called Kyriakos Markides, and he was observing a spiritual healer based in Greece. And the first book was called The Magus of Strovolos, and the second book was called Homage to the Sun. And I was particularly struck by something that he witnessed with the Magus in Homage to the Sun. And the Magus did a lot of healing, and but he also was quite experimental, and he had the ability to push his consciousness into other areas. And one of the things he wanted to try, just for fun really, was to see if he could turn a bit of lead into gold. Now, before you all start laughing, because it's so apocryphal to talk about turning lead into gold, and has lots of symbolism that people attach to it as well, so that they say, well, it wasn't really turning it into gold, that was symbolic of something. But the interesting thing was that the Magus had a go at turning some lead into gold, and he described it as so. He said, I projected my consciousness into the gold, and I looked at the way it was all held together, its molecular construction. And I did the same with the lead, and I noticed that there was quite close similarities. So then I decided to see if I could change the structure of the lead in that conscious state to match what I'd seen in the gold. And he said, indeed, the lead did turn to gold, but he said too, it didn't really last very long. It didn't stay as gold. Now, at the time, he didn't know why, and Kyriakos didn't suggest anything. But I think it comes down to, again, what Seth said. And I used to say, it's because the lead knows what it is. and it knows it's not gold. And Seth says here, no material object of any kind is formed without the cooperation and without the inner consent of the atoms and molecules that compose it. Form is not thrust upon matter. So I thought, well, you know, all these years later, Seth has pretty much answered that question. I think I've kind of come to the end of my talk time, and I hope that it's sort of resonated with a few of you. And I'm hoping that I may be able to answer a few of your questions. I don't know everything, so I'll be honest if I don't know an answer, but I'm the sort of person that will have a good stab at it in the context of my experience of the Seth material. So thank you very much.
And good morning, everybody. We are here live with Richard Gentle coming in from the UK. And we're very excited to kick off this live Q&A section. And now I'm going to hand it over to Lilia because she has some really lovely questions for Richard. So go ahead.
Thank you so much, Tom. So we'll kick it off with a question from Regina Joyce Clark, who is saying about your description of dropping things into framework 2 and then forgetting about them, which is lovely. I've read that, but also read Seth's recommendations that we visualize what we desire for 15 minutes a day. So what is the difference here?
Well, thanks for that question, Regina. It's a very good question. And I think one of the things is that when we are thinking about what we want, we're tending to miss actually having it. So if we carry on thinking about it too much, we start focusing on the lack of having it rather than the fact that we have actually got it. And the idea of dropping something into this little pond in framework 2 is that we've already done the work. We already know what we want. So, you know, stop holding on to it. We have to let go. As I said in my talk, I kind of liken it to this idea of ordering something online. You know, you look through all the things that you want and you place your order, and then you just wait for it to turn up. What you don't do is you don't ring up the supplier and say, I want Fred to deliver this a particular route. And it's got to actually be delivered on a certain day. And unless that's possible, the order goes back in on the shelf. So whilst your orders come out of the warehouse and gone into the van, suddenly it's got the wrong driver. So out it comes back into the warehouse again. So this is the idea of dropping something into that pond and just letting go of it so you're not holding on to it. But obviously we do have to do a certain amount of work in our time-based reality of actually focusing on the sort of thing that we would actually like to have. So we build an impression, we feel it in our mind's eye, we imagine having what we want and living it as if we've already got it. But we don't want to hang on to it any further, we want to let go. And Seth suggests, I think, doing this every couple of weeks, you know, really do your focus, then forget about it, and then perhaps in 2 weeks' time, if nothing's really come to the fore, just have another go at it. But it's important to surrender. A lot of the philosophers, including Seth, talk about letting go, surrendering, not holding on to things. So hopefully that helps to answer your question.
Thank you. Pam Benson writes, I have days when I'm feeling really, really good. And then what seems to happen is that the wheels fall off the bus. It all breaks down. And I'm left thinking, I attracted this somehow. But how? It seems to me like the opposite of what I'm feeling. What's going on here?
I think sometimes it can be very easy to get confused about in our own thinking. And also we do tend to worry, and we're always looking out for things. So there's a similarity here with the first question in a way.
Yes.
And so there are all sorts of things going off in our lives and all sorts of probable events And as has been said by one or two in this conference, the probability of something occurring, perhaps more than another probability, it all happens, at a very individual level. So things that perhaps are your feeling tone, your general feeling tone of who you are. So regardless of whether you're feeling upbeat or downbeat, over time, I mean, we have to use those terms because that's the life that we're sort of experiencing. We have a development of what our sort of level is, how we feel constantly, consistently. So even if I've had a really great day or a really bad day, overall, my great days and bad days are fairly, they kind of reach a certain level. So that's my point of attraction, really, at that level. So if you are practiced perhaps in spending more time worrying about things, and perhaps things aren't going too well for you quite a bit of the time, those little times that you dip into the better feeling, perhaps they're not being consistent enough. So it's always very good to try and, reach for those feelings that make you feel good, to actually try and turn towards those things that you want, and just have a moment of actually experiencing them in your mind's eye, but a little bit more often, perhaps.
Okay. Now going sort of to the broader level here of society, you talked about developing your own truth, but isn't developing your own truth the problem these days? It seems everyone is insisting that they have the truth, that their perspective is what counts. Isn't that the source of our conflicts as a society?
I think one of the things about that really is that, yes, certainly develop your own truth, but do you have to impose your truth on other people? And I think that's when you start getting the conflict. So it's fair that we should all have our own beliefs and our own feelings about things, but before we actually make a judgment on other people based on our beliefs about what we think is true, it's better to sort of just take that nonchalant attitude again that Seth often says, don't get too heated by the things that you see. And also don't forget, you create the reality that you're experiencing. So you have a part to play in what you're perceiving coming at you as being the right or the wrong or whatever. So from that, you do develop your idea of truth, but you can't really say that anybody particularly has the only truth. And because of that, we've got to be careful about judging everybody else. It's true that we often want to be involved in something. We might feel very strongly about a certain thing, and there's nothing wrong in the world that we're experiencing, that may be something that you actually get a certain joy out of, maybe protesting against something or standing up for something or saving something. So there's nothing wrong in you doing that. But when you actually try to impose that on everybody else, I think that's where you run into problems.
Definitely. Sort of related here, perhaps to the other ones, the issue of trying too hard and striving, and really having that sort of be the feeling tone for how you engage. How does this hold us back and sabotage us? And then what is the antidote? Because there's so much aspiration.
I think, again, the main difficulty is when you really want something, you're actually focusing on the fact that you don't have it. And all the imagination and vibration and everything about your personality and your feeling tones, rather than actually living as if you've already got something, you're sort of looking around you and saying, well, it ain't there. I can see, I live in reality. What I'm wanting isn't there, and the chances of me getting it. So you start putting up other barriers, because the more you overthink it, the more you come up with other reasons why you probably can't have something. And let's face it, most of us can look around and say, well, the odds are stacked against us from the position we're in. but that's not really how it works. So actually not focusing too much and letting go is a good thing, because it allows the work to be done in the background. So it is actually quite good. Yeah, focus with great intensity, and focus. Seth often says, focus with intensity, but don't worry as to the outcome. You've done the imagining. Just let the universe now get on with it. Don't keep putting your two penneth in. So again, that surrender, let go. Very often, I've had times where I've had protracted times of things not working for years. And it gets to a point, because you tend to worry about the repercussions of you not coping in a certain situation. Finances is a big one for a lot of people. Indeed. And certainly it was something that affected me for many years. And in the end, I realized that I just couldn't control what was going to happen. And I basically threw my hands up in the air and said, forget it. I can't. If something's going to happen, it'll just have to happen, because I've thought of everything I can think of to change this situation, and I can't do it. So I'm letting go. And one of the things I've noticed is that when you reach that point, you genuinely have to let go. You can't just sort of pretend and think, I'll let go, and maybe, I'll think about it again tomorrow. You really have to give up. And it's tied in with a bit of a leap of faith. And it's also tied in with a lot of the things that Seth will often talk about as being the stuff that actually is the hidden bit. It's the bit that's between everything else. It's the feeling that you have that you can't explain. And when you actually attain these changes in any area of your life, you know what it is and you know what it feels like, but you can't actually describe it to anybody. Words fail you. And I think they call it a quail experience. I think it's Italian, which means that you have to have the experience to understand it. So in a way, as a man, I could say, oh yes, I can imagine what it might be like to give birth to a child. But unless I'm actually the person giving birth to the child, I can't really be certain that I've actually really experienced what that feels like, because I'm empathizing, but I'm not doing it. So hopefully that answers a bit.
Definitely. So for you personally, Richard, also, just as you've been working with the Seth material for quite a long time, and you talked a little bit about the financial challenges as a particular example, but has there been a challenge for you personally that really stands out, that you really found, this is the turning point for me? This is when I really I got to live Seth. This is when it clicked. Could you share a little bit about that?
I think there's been quite a few, and certainly the biggest one has been that financial one.
Yeah.
But I think there have been other ones where I found that often when I'm driving is when I'm most receptive to creating my reality experiences, because I'm occupied and concentrating, but I'm not really concentrating. So, I've let go of a part of me, and I can be driving along and think maybe that somebody might turn out in front of me a bit further on and impede my path. And within seconds, somebody will go and turn out with me. It's almost like I get instant materialization when I'm driving. And I spent a lot of time experimenting with that, so that I wasn't bothered if anybody turned out in front of me, or I wasn't bothered if I came across somebody who was going slower than the speed limit we're allowed to go. And very often when I actually then thought, if I consciously think that I'm not bothered, it doesn't matter, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not in a rush, 9 times out of 10, that person in front of me will actually turn off at the very next junction. It's quite amazing, really, that sort of thing happens. But certainly with the financial thing, it was quite a big thing for me because
Yes.
I had so many years, almost 30 years of struggling. And just in the end, decided that there was nothing else I could do. And there was a sort of letting go moment. And suddenly everything turned around. I did do one or two other little practices as well. I put a few other things in place. And gradually I found that now, instead of waking up on a morning and thinking, how could I afford to run the car, or how could I afford to pay a rent, or whatever, the question suddenly changed to what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And it was a very different question from that one, how can I earn enough money this week to do something at the end of the month? And that doesn't happen anymore. So I'm not a rich person. I'm not one of these people who has gone from rags to riches, and those one of those millionaires that we often meet in this sort of work. But I can say that it doesn't worry me in the slightest anymore, and it's something I don't even have to think about, which is very, very strange, coming from worrying where you're thinking about it every waking moment to almost overnight not even having to think about it at all. And that's the feeling that you will get when something changes, and that's really what Seth and the material has really helped me with, because I really started to see things differently. I've put my focus in different places, and I've stopped worrying. I've been more relaxed with myself, more gentle with myself, as my namesake. And I think it really has worked, and I think that I would attribute to a lot of the understanding of the Seth material.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard. I think we have come upon sort of the end of our time, but it's just been delightful to hear you share about a beautiful practice in the car while you're driving. It can be that simple and that specific, or it can be very broad and asking those big questions. What do I want to do with my life now? Thank you so much for your sharings.
Yeah, and thank you as well for letting me speak at the conference.
Very good.
Thank you.
Welcome back. It is time to bring our next speaker up onto our virtual stage, and our next speaker is Laura Shanley. Now, Laura is an author, a speaker, and a childbirth consultant. She is recognized as a leading voice in the natural birth movement. Laura is also an avid Seth reader since 1977. She began her childbirth experience using Seth-inspired practices, and her experience in natural birthing is frequently sought by television and movie production companies, and she has been featured in many of the major media, including ABC News, 2020, The Doctors, BBC, Disney, The New York Times, Reuters, and The Washington Post. Now, Laura has read everything in the large body known as the Seth material, including all the Seth books and all the Jane Roberts books as well. And she continues to be delighted and fascinated by the material, as many of us are. Now, Laura is humorous, refreshing as a speaker, and always looks forward to sharing and connecting with like-minded individuals. So I remember in 2014, I saw her speak at our conference, and I have to say her talk was truly electrifying because she brought a practical approach to the material and shared with us how she related it into her everyday life, including a childbirth. So today, Laura will be speaking on My Magical Life, 44 years of Seth applied. So we really look forward to her talk this year. So let's welcome her to our virtual etheric stage.
Hi, my name is Laura Shanley, and the title of my talk is My Magical Life, 44 Years of Seth Applied. So since discovering Seth in 1977, I've had many fascinating experiences and synchronicities, and applied these concepts to all aspects of my life. So some more successfully than others. But I'm going to tell you about some of the more interesting ways I've applied these ideas. A few years ago, my husband and I went to New York. We like to go every so often to see Broadway shows. And my husband said to me, is there anybody here in New York that you want to see while you're here? So instantly I thought of Rick Stack, who some of you are familiar with. He's been writing and speaking about Seth for many years, and he was one of Jane Roberts' students, and he was one of the New York boys that she called them. So every time I've gone to New York over the years, I've always thought it would be wonderful to meet him, and especially now because I had just finished taking his online class. And so I thought, well, gee, I would really like to meet Rick, but if I call, I don't know his number. I would have to just email him and say, hi, I'm one of your students and I'd love to meet you. And I really didn't feel like dealing with rejection or like, well, yeah, that's nice, but no, thank you. So I decided, okay, well, yeah, I've always wanted to meet him, but maybe it's just not going to happen. So a few days later, we're in New York and we are shopping, and suddenly we realize that it's later than we thought and we have to get to a Broadway show. So we run out the door of this store and we try to get a cab. Can't get a cab. So we just start running, and I'm following my husband through the streets. I don't even know why he's going the way he's going, but he's going left and right and just wherever there aren't a lot of people or a lot of cars. And so I'm following him, we're running, and suddenly I look in front of me and there is Rick Stack. I'm face to face with Rick Stack. And what's interesting is that I knew his face really well because I had just taken his class, and most of the time I couldn't go to the class live. I had other things going on, so I would have to watch a recording. So I'd have to go to his site and I would go to his picture and click on his picture to get into the class. And then I'd watch a little bit and I'd go do something else, and then I'd come back and I would be logged out. So I'd have to click on his picture again, log back in, and then I could watch some more. And it happened over and over again to the point where it was driving me crazy. There's that damn picture. Why can't I just stay logged in? And I almost wrote to him and said, can you make it so that you're not logging me out, so quickly? But anyhow, what it did do in a way was it just cemented the image of him in my mind. It was almost like a vision board. So when I saw that face in front of me in the middle of a New York street, I knew it because I had seen it so many times. So I just said, Rick, hi, it's Laura Shanley. I just finished taking your class. And so he reached out and we hugged each other, and he said, I've got to run. I've got to get to my Tuesday night class. Great meeting you. And we went our separate ways. And then when I got home, I had a dream that in the dream I was saying, this changed my life, because if I can meet the one person in New York out of 8.5 million people, if I can run into the one person that I wanted to meet, then I can do anything. So that was a really fun synchronicity. Here's another one. So I was in Boulder. I lived in Boulder for about 35 years. And one day I was walking my dog around the park, and my dog got interested in another dog, and they're sniffing each other. And so I started to talk to the woman who had the dog and said, oh, what kind of dog was he? And she told me, and I just didn't recognize the breed. And she said, I got him in upstate New York. And I said, oh, I have family in upstate New York. My family had moved out to Colorado when I was 5, but most of the family stayed back there. And so she said, oh, I have family in upstate New York. So I said, my family is in the Lake George area. And she said, my family's in the Lake George area. And I said, mine has an island. My family bought an island in 1950. And it's been in the family ever since. And so she said, my family has an island near Bolton Landing. And then she looks at me and she says, who are you? And I told her who I was and who my parents were and my grandparents. And she said, I'm your cousin. You know, our grandfathers are brothers. And she had left New York years ago. Her family still lived back there, but her grandfather was the oldest of 9, and my grandfather was the second oldest. And the 9 of them had bought this island back in 1950 for $37,000. And it was an artists and writers colony. And this was like the summer home for this artists and writers colony. And it was 100 years old. And my grandfather got what was called the playhouse and half of one of the bridges. On the bridges, you can sleep, there's apartments up there. And so my grandfather took half of one of the bridges, and her grandfather took the other half of that same bridge. So I did remember maybe when I was, like 4 or 5, seeing her. And when she told me her name, I hadn't seen her since then, hadn't had any contact with her. So, and we have been friends ever since. Another interesting thing about that island is that when I looked into the history of it, I discovered that it was originally owned by Katrina Trask. And Katrina Trask was a writer and a mystic, and she lived in Saratoga Springs, which is maybe 45 minutes from Lake George. And some of you might remember Saratoga Springs because that's where Jane Roberts was born. And when Jane was young, she used to go to a writer's colony called Yaddo. And eventually she submitted some of her work there, and she talked about, I think it was in The God of Jane, she talked about sitting on the steps of Yaddo. And so when I was doing the research, I found that the island that my family had bought was the summer home for Yaddo. Katrina Trask is the woman who started Yaddo. And she had a vision to go to Lake George and buy an island, and she bought these 3 islands, and her vision was to connect them with bridges, and then eventually it ended up in my family. So just so many interesting connections. This next story is another synchronicity. This happened, I think, about 2 years ago when my daughter Michelle decided she wanted to go to Ancestry.com and just see if she could find out more about our ancestry, which I pretty much know with me that my family was Jewish on both sides, but with my ex-husband, we weren't too sure. We thought English and Scottish, maybe Irish. But anyhow, she did her DNA, and no big surprises really. But I decided, well, I'm going to do mine too, just out of curiosity, and even fewer surprises, 100% Eastern European Jew. So, but one thing that happened was that somebody sent us a message, and it said, I was adopted, and I have been looking for my father for 30 years. Can you help me? I don't know anything about him other than he lived for a while in Sandusky, Ohio. So, but it shows that you are my second cousin. So I talked to my family, and my sister said, do not help this woman. Like she is probably, she's an illegitimate child. The father may not know about her, and it could wreak havoc on his marriage. But I felt for this woman. Her mother, her birth mother, she had eventually found, but she had died, and her actual adopted mother had died in a car accident, and so and her father had died also. So she really wanted to find her real father. So I decided I would help her. So all that we knew really was that she had matched up on my mother's side of the family. And she thought that her mother had said, I think the last name was Squires. Well, my mother's family is Swire. So I thought, okay, you know, it must be, your father must be one of my mother's 15 first cousins. But the problem is, how do I go to any of them? First of all, I'm not in touch with any of them. Secondly, how do I go to one of them and say, this might be your daughter? You know, this is awkward. As my sister said, this would be really awkward, if not damaging. The other option is that I could maybe go to one of their children and approach them about it. But I thought, well, I'll just see what I can do. So instantly I thought, okay, there's 16 of them, and I think only 5 of the cousins, or my mother's cousins, were men. So we were able to narrow it down to those 5. So, but I thought, okay, I'm not in touch with them. And the only person I'm in touch with, the only one of my second cousins that I'm in touch with, because everybody lives back east and I'm in Colorado, and the only one of my second cousins that I'm in touch with is my cousin Cynthia. And she was the one that I met when I was walking around the lake. So I went to Cynthia and I said, did your dad ever live, you know, this is kind of odd, but I want to talk to you about it. Here's this person that approached me. She's adopted, been looking for her father for 30 years. Was your dad ever in Sandusky, Ohio? So she said, not that I know of. He's never said anything to me about that. And I asked my mother, I said, did any of your cousins ever live there? And she said, I think everybody stayed back east for the most part. So, and the other problem was that Cynthia was really estranged from her family, and she only talked to her dad a few times a year. So, but she said, well, maybe next time he calls, I will ask him. So, a few months later, and the 3 of us started communicating after that. And then a few months later, Cynthia's dad called her, and she decided she was going to ask him about his life. And she said, I know you were in the Navy, but what did you do when you got out of the Navy? And he said, well, I moved to Sandusky, Ohio for a little bit, and that was it. She decided to tell him that this woman had approached us and gave information. She had given us information about her mother, her birth mother, and Cynthia's dad said, yes, I was involved with her, and she never told me that she was pregnant, and I moved away, and we never had contact again. And so, meanwhile, Cynthia was an only child, and so they ended up to be sisters, and they did end up doing their DNA. Cynthia did her DNA just for verification, and they said, yes, they're sisters. And they have been then in communication and talking on the phone ever since. So it was a wonderful experience. And what was interesting too is that Betsy, my cousin, then she was a writer, and she lived in Pennsylvania. But while all this was going on, actually, I think it was maybe a few days after they discovered that she really was Cynthia's sister, she had planned to go to a writers' conference in Colorado. And so the 3 of us decided to get together. And at that point, we knew that they were sisters, and we got together. And Betsy brought all her pictures, and her son actually looked quite a bit like their father. And she did actually get in touch with her dad, and they never really did form much of a relationship. He's since died, but she and Cynthia did become very close. one of the first areas of my life that I applied Seth's concepts to were my births. So I had discovered Seth in 1977, and actually I think it was a few months later that I got pregnant. And I had never really wanted to have kids because it just terrified me. I was frightened of doctors, and I had always heard horrible things about, birth is the worst thing you'll ever go through, and it's painful, it's dangerous. But here I had the Seth material, and I thought, well, what if I believed that birth could be easy and painless or relatively painless? Why should the very thing that ensures the continuation of the race be the worst thing you ever go through? And I started reading, and one of the books that I read was called Spiritual Midwifery by Ina May Gaskin. And I loved the birth stories in there because a lot of these women were having really easy births, and they were having them on this farm, and they had midwives. But one woman talked about how with her first birth, her first labor, she felt contractions, but she felt like she was in an altered state of consciousness. With her second birth, she didn't feel any contractions. All she felt was the altered state of consciousness, and then the baby was born, and the midwife barely made it there in time. So I decided that's the kind of birth I'm going to have. So soon after I got pregnant, my husband and I, he was also reading the Seth material, and he was really on board with this. Like, okay, we are going to create these births that are easy and gentle, and we'll just do it ourselves, because if we bring in anybody, we're going to have to explain this to them. And so I got pregnant, and I had a very easy pregnancy. I threw up one day, and I thought, okay, well, why am I throwing up? Food is supposed to go in and come out. It's not supposed to come back up. What kind of sense does that make? I questioned everything that I had been told, that society tells you about pregnancy and birth. So, and I thought, I'm not afraid of the birth. Why am I rejecting my food? Why am I having this feeling? And I realized I was afraid of motherhood. So I began saying belief suggestions, that I wasn't afraid to be a mother, that I knew I was going to be a good mother, and I never threw up again with any of my pregnancies. Never had any symptoms of pregnancy, that so-called symptoms. I just loved being pregnant. I never got prenatal care. I just ate what I wanted, and I got exercise, fresh air. I worked on my dreams. I practiced giving birth in dreams. In the beginning of my pregnancy, I was dreaming that I was in a hospital surrounded by my father, a physician, who you can imagine how he felt about this. I was surrounded by my father and other doctors, and I was in pain. By the end of my pregnancy, I was dreaming that I was giving birth at home, and it was easy and gentle and wonderful. So when I went into labor with him, we had a filmmaker there who was interested in making a film about us. So we called him, and he came over, and we had a friend staying with us, and so he was there. And then my ex-boyfriend was interested, and his new boyfriend, and they just had been fascinated by what we had been telling them about the Seth material and about birth and what we believed it could be. And so they came. And so it was me and 5 men, which is pretty unusual. But so I did feel the contractions. I did feel some pain, which I was thinking I was going to go into this altered state of consciousness and not feel any pain. The baby was going to pop out. I did feel some pain, but it wasn't anything that I couldn't handle. And so I was in the bathroom, sitting on the toilet, which was like the most comfortable place for me to be, and which a lot of women say in labor, it's a really comfortable place to be. And we were actually using a Ouija board at the time. So I'm sitting on the toilet, we're using a Ouija board, and suddenly my water breaks, and I feel the baby's face down there. So I think, okay, baby's coming. And I didn't say anything to anybody that the baby was coming, but the filmmaker backed up to let me through, and I got over to the bed, and I was on my hands and knees about to turn over, and I heard a voice, an inner voice, say, "Don't turn over." I had planned on just giving birth on my back because I thought that's how babies were born. But there was no denying this voice that was saying, "Don't turn over." So I was on my hands and knees, and my baby literally came flying out of me. And there was none of this pushing and panting and struggling and "you can do it" and "count to 10" and any of that. I didn't time contractions. I didn't check dilation. I just trusted that the same consciousness that knew how to take an egg and a sperm and turn it into a human being could get that human being out of my body if I just allowed it to happen. If I could just grasp the concept of what it means to basically do nothing. I didn't have to figure out how to grow fingers and toes, so I didn't feel like I had to figure out how to birth this baby. I just needed to move out of the way and let it happen. So that's what I did. So my husband caught him in midair, and meanwhile the cameraman is standing there. He had turned off the camera to let me through to the bed, and so it's not on film. But it was just a wonderful experience. And so with my second baby, I decided, this was 2 years later, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to give birth on my hands and knees because that had worked so well. And once again, I had a wonderful pregnancy. No vomiting. And, but one night I had a dream, and I was watching a woman giving birth, and she was standing up over this little plastic baby bathtub, and she was catching the baby herself. And, I heard a voice say to me, "Tell her to remember not to do too much." That, as I said, it's not a matter of learning how to breathe correctly or push correctly. It really is a matter of not doing anything and just allowing it to happen, just like you allow yourself to go to sleep, or you have sex and you're not reading a manual, you're just feeling your way through it and you do what feels right. And so in the dream, the woman catches the baby herself as she's standing, and I thought, that's how I'm going to have this baby. So I went into labor one morning with him, and I was feeling some pain, and I decided to take a shower, and then I was walking across the room and my water broke. And after that, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel any pain. And so I reached my hand inside myself. I could feel my muscles going like this. So I knew that I was having contractions, but I wasn't in any pain. So I took out my little plastic baby bathtub, because with my first birth, right after my water bag broke, the baby came out. So I thought, okay, baby's coming. So I took out the little plastic baby bathtub and I stood over it, and a foot popped out. Now, I had not been expecting a foot to come out. And actually my friend, one of my friends who had been at my first birth, my boyfriend's boyfriend, former boyfriend's boyfriend, had said during that pregnancy, he said, "I had a dream, but I saw the baby inside you standing right side up." But I thought, well, maybe that's symbolic of something else. So anyhow, here I am with this foot hanging out of me, and he's like pointing his toes, like he's testing the water, wiggling his foot around. And my 2-year-old is pointing and says, "What's that?" And I said, "That's the baby's foot." And my husband says, "What should we do? Should I call an ambulance? What do you want to do?" And I thought, no, I trusted that I was fine. I know most people freak out at breech births, but I felt like I feel like my body knows what it's doing. So basically, I wasn't in any pain, so it was really pretty easy. So I just said my belief suggestions. I said, I believe I have inner help. I believe I trust my body. I trust my baby. And within a few minutes, like his foot got lower, a little bit lower and lower, and then his other foot popped out. And then I just gave one push-pull and guided him out. And he was great. He was fine. I'll talk about one more birth. And with that second birth, 12 years later, when I wrote my book, I wrote a book called Unassisted Childbirth. And I put up a website, unassistedchildbirth.com. And when I was writing my book, I came across a passage from a doctor who eventually asked if he could write the introduction to my book, Michelle O'Donnell, and I said yes. And in his in this book, he said that breech babies can be born vaginally, but there's two key things to keep in mind. Keep the woman in a standing squat or upright position and do absolutely nothing to interfere if at all possible. And this is what I felt had been the message of the dream. Stand and don't do anything. So I felt like I could have had a dream that showed me I was having a breech baby, but that would have frightened me because there is a lot of fear around breech births. People don't understand it and they're afraid of it. And so, but I didn't. I had a dream that showed me what to do. And so that was just a fantastic experience. This last birth that I'll tell you about was my daughter. I had decided, my daughter Joy, I had decided that, you know what, if my husband's there, fine. But if he's not, I'll just do it myself. And actually, with my second baby, I didn't realize it, but he really wasn't in the room at the time that the baby came out. I didn't know it until I was writing my book, and I said to him, asked him a question about the birth, and he was like, I don't know, I wasn't there. He had gone into the other room, but I was so within myself that I didn't realize he wasn't there. So with this one, I thought, okay, if he's there, he's there. If he's not, he's not. And as it turned out, I went into labor with her, and he wasn't there. He was at the library. And so my other two kids were sleeping. And once again, I took out my little plastic baby bathtub. This time I got down, I sort of straddled it. I got down on one knee and one foot. And my water bag hadn't broken. But I looked down, but I felt her coming. And I looked down and I saw her face through the water bag. It hadn't popped yet. And so I could see her looking at me through the water. And we just looked at each other. And you talk about a connection, you know, spectacular. And we looked at each other. And then my water broke and she slid into my hands. And I remember feeling like, this is the most beautiful gift I have ever received. And I felt like we were the only two people in the world. It was just one of the highlights of my life. And I remember feeling like I touched the eternal. Like even if I never have another psychic experience or physical experience like that again, I know that there is something beyond what we can see, what we can perceive with our physical senses. And it was such a powerful, life-changing experience for me, which is probably one of the reasons that I am still talking about it all these years later. And now she is pregnant with her second baby and planning a home birth. This next experience happened in 2000. And like many Seth readers, I have attempted to make money using these concepts. And I have been successful off and on over the years. So in 2000, and I had actually published my book, Unassisted Childbirth. It had been published by an academic press, which meant that I got very little money. And so and actually it took years before I had to make a change at the last minute. So even by 2000, I don't think I had received my first check yet. I was thrilled that someone wanted to publish my book and wasn't asking me for any money, but I hadn't made money off my writing yet. I had been writing for small magazines that didn't pay. But once again, I was thrilled to be published. So in 2000, someone sent me an email and they said, here's this great website and it's called ThemeStream and they're paying writers 10 cents a hit for articles. And I thought 10 cents a hit on the internet is a lot of money. And so, and a friend of mine, I told a friend of mine about it and she posted her thing. She never made enough money to get her $20 check because a lot of people, they had 40,000 writers at one point writing for that site. But what I had is, I had a website at that time, well, I still do, and I was getting a lot of traffic to my site. And a lot of people were coming to my site because they thought I was a nutcase, but they were coming to my site. So, and I had my birth stories on my site, and I had articles I had written. So what I decided to do was to put my birth stories and my articles on this site, ThemeStream, so that when people went to my website, they would click on an article or birth story, and instead of just going to another page on my site, a new window would open up and they would be going to ThemeStream, reading it on ThemeStream. So I posted all my birth stories. I posted any article I had ever written and since I wasn't paid for them, I still owned the rights to them. I had written children's poetry. I posted those. I started thinking of things to write about. And pretty soon I started making money. And at first I was like, I don't even know if this site is for real. And it took a while before you would get your first check, because they didn't pay until like 6 weeks after the end of the first quarter. So I was writing thinking, I hope this site is for real. And but I wrote in the last few weeks of the first quarter of 2000, and then 6 weeks later I got my first check for $600. I thought, this is the first money I have made off my writing. So then I really threw myself into the site and really got inspired. So and I had told my husband, when the next check comes, I'm going to cash it and I'm going to spread it out on the bed and I'm going to roll around in the money. This was my fantasy. So my next check came after 3 months and it was for $8,000. And I cashed it, spread it out on the bed and rolled in it. And he was mad. He was like, you're wrinkling the bills. But I was really loving it. And I just started letting the inspiration come. Like, what could I possibly write about? And this article these words popped into my head. Nude photos of broccoli spears. And I was like, what in the hell is that? And I wrote this, I think it was a 160-word parody about teen singing sensation Broccoli Spears posed nude for the Farmer's Almanac. And how she had merged with Cauliflower, or they had this melody that they had recorded together. It was really kind of silly, but as we know in the Seth material, Seth talks about the importance of play. And to me, this was just this playful little thing that I had done. Well, for some reason, this nude photos of broccoli spears starts getting picked up by the search engines. And you start Googling nude photos, and on the first page of results, nude photos of broccoli spears is coming up. And people are clicking on it, and I'm making my dimes. And so I remember my parents were in China at the time, and I remember writing to them, and I wrote them a letter. I said, I'm living off broccoli, because this article, I was making $100 a day off of this article. And then, or if you Google broccoli, like broccoli recipes, this article was coming up. And so, and then pretty soon my whole website started coming up. And so I learned a little something about marketing. There were a few of us who were interested in marketing. And so I started advertising my articles for like a penny or 2 pennies each, but I was making 10 cents off them. So I eventually became like the 5th highest paid writer on the site. And I was in the New York Times, and I was author of the week. And I got to the point where I was making $1,000 a day. And I was in heaven. And then maybe 2 weeks after I got my last $50,000 check, the site went under. So, but it was something that, definitely was life-changing. I mean, first of all, I was making money for the first time in my life off my writing. And it just showed me that, just when you have fun with these ideas and you get creative and you think outside the box, that wonderful things can happen. Another interesting thing that has happened in my life occurred after the birth of my first child, John. My husband and I had read in a book. I had had a little bit of trouble with breastfeeding. I had never seen anyone breastfeed. And so I didn't know what I was doing. And I did eventually get it. But in the meantime, I read in a book that men were physiologically capable of producing milk. Now, my husband didn't actually want to nurse our child, but he wanted to see if he could produce milk simply through suggestion. So he began suggesting to himself that he would produce milk. And in this book, it had talked about how there had been a Native American who had produced milk for babies in the tribe, and there are documented cases of it throughout history. Men have nipples. They have glands that are capable of producing milk. It's maybe nature's backup system. So, but in any case, he began suggesting to himself that he would produce milk. And one day he was sitting there reading, and milk began dripping out of one breast. He felt something on his shirt and lifted up his shirt, and he showed me, and milk is dripping out of his breast. So we showed my father, a physician, and he said, obviously there is something physiologically wrong with David. But we knew that that wasn't the case, that this was an experiment for us in the power of the mind. And so he decided, okay, I know I can do it now, and I'm just going to turn it off. And he did. And within a few days, it went away. So when I was writing for that one website for ThemeStream, that was one of the things I did write about. That was also a very popular article, Milkmen, Fathers Who Breastfeed. And I've since collected other anecdotes from people who have produced breast milk. In most cases, they use a breast pump. Anybody that uses a breast pump on their nipple will produce breast milk eventually. It's an interesting phenomenon. And so there are, we knew a gay couple that had adopted a baby and nursed the baby. And I have gone on to speak about this. It's not something my children are particularly proud of, but I have spoken about it on Animal Planet and on the Learning Channel, and they mentioned it in the New York Times. And so that's been, just another interesting way of applying these concepts. So once again, my name is Laura Shanley, and my website is unassistedchildbirth.com, or freebirth.com will get you there too. And I'm always happy to hear from people. I'd love to hear about your experiences with the Seth material. And I've enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you.
All right, here we are with Laura Shanley live. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your birth stories with us. To me, when I hear when I hear your stories, it's less like, to be able to take that natural process and reclaim it and make it the natural process that it is, and just really have, to have that co-creation of both, having that allowing of the natural forces, that's really, it's like channeling life through us. It's just really, to me, it's just super inspiring to hear these stories. So thank you for bringing that into the conference. And so, as you know, the format already, Lilia is going to pick out some of the best questions from the Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to Lilia.
Thank you, Tom. Laura, just mesmerizing. And along those lines, let's jump off with the stories of birthing and the birthing process. And Nadia Aragon in particular wants to know whether you had any pregnancy-related dreams before actually getting pregnant, because you had mentioned that wasn't in your plan. You didn't want to do that.
I didn't have, that I can recall, I didn't have any pregnancy dreams, but the night that I conceived, which I don't think I talked about in this talk, I remember I had a very vivid dream that I was taking my hands together like this, as if I was forming something in between them, and a blue spark appeared. And I woke up my husband, and I said, I feel like I just created something. And I wrote it down in my journal. November 30th. And then when I found out that I was pregnant, which was the one time in all my pregnancies that I did go into a clinic and I did get a pregnancy test, because this was 43 years ago. And I think that's how we were doing it then. I went into a clinic and they said, okay, you would have conceived on November 30th. And so I looked back in my dream journal, and that's where I found that. Now, since then, I have read accounts, and I think you can Google this, of other women who said that they felt or saw a blue spark when they conceived. And then, and during my pregnancy, I remember having dreams of that same color blue, of seeing my baby floating in a blue, beautiful balloon. So I think, pregnancy, like our dreams are just one of our natural resources that we can tap into. When people say, God, weren't you afraid to be alone? I'm like, I didn't look at myself as being alone. I looked that I was tapping into my natural resources, which are visualization, affirmations, dreams, impulses. That was so strong to me, and that was so powerful that no, I didn't miss having this outside voice telling me, in the world that I live in, we sometimes refer to it as prenatal scare rather than prenatal care, because they tell you, pregnancy is this, you're going to have all these symptoms, and then birth, you're going to have all these problems, and you're going to have to try really hard. No, it's really a matter of just trying to forget as much as you can of what you've learned and be open to a new way of looking at birth. Why shouldn't this be one of the most wonderful things that a woman goes through? Why should conception be fantastic or potentially fantastic, but birth is horrible? Doesn't make sense.
Exactly. Sort of we're here to suffer.
Right.
Yeah.
But along those lines and suffering, you mentioned, right, that you set the intention you're not going to feel pain. But is there value in pain?
I think
from your perspective, any insight?
I know Seth talks about suffering, because people have asked Seth that about suffering. And he said the only value really in suffering is teaching you not to suffer, or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I understand that suffering and pain are a part of life. And I didn't have completely pain-free births. I do think, I did have some pain in all of my labors, but it wasn't anything where I felt like, oh my God, I have got to go get that epidural.
Exactly.
For me, it was more like learning to ride the waves. And I wrote an article about swimming with my daughter and how I had tried to stay on top of the water. And finally I decided, I'm going to get my hair wet. And then for the rest of the afternoon, we were having tea parties under the water. And I used the analogy of, in birth, people try to stay on top of the contractions. And I think it's that resistance, I'm going to stay on top of this. I'm just going to try not to feel this. If you go with it, and you kind of allow, if you live from here up, which a lot of people do, yes, birth will take you into your body.
Absolutely.
You will feel it. If you are comfortable living in your body and you are comfortable with your sexuality, because birth is just the continuation of the end of the sex act. If you're comfortable, you're not ashamed of your sexuality, you love your sexuality, you don't feel guilty, then it can be a wonderful experience. I've written articles and I've spoken about orgasmic childbirth, that some women have orgasms during birth. It's a phenomenon that has happened over and over again. It's the same organs, it's the same hormones. So is there a function? Is there a reason we have pain? I don't claim to understand all that. I just know that I studied this when I first got into this. I was also studying a little bit about childbirth and how much of the pain is fear triggering the fight-flight response. It's the same thing like you turn white when you're afraid. They say people turn white as a ghost. Why? Because blood and oxygen is rushing into your arms and legs so you can fight this danger or run from it. And your body thinks it's doing you a favor. Well, the blood and oxygen when you're afraid in labor isn't going to the uterus, and the uterus of a frightened woman is literally white. It doesn't have the fuel it needs, and so we have pain. This made sense to me, and I felt like if I can just trust, then I can allow that blood and oxygen to flow to the uterus. It can gently contract and get that baby out, and that's what happened.
Beautiful, beautiful. So you really speak about the power of allowing, that to allow it to happen, that we're not pushing, trying. We have been, as women in the US healthcare system, that we have to try. Birth is hard work. This
Right.
is how it's done. We have to push.
Right.
But sort of broadening that a little bit from your experience in childbirth and then your experience in the day-to-day, how do you experience and see the balance between allowing, the power of allowing, and the power of doing? How do you?
Well, I would have to say that I really was good at this in my births. And so, and I grasped what it meant. And because to me, the hard part of giving birth the way I did was coming up against a society that said you are stupid and crazy.
Yes.
That was the hard part, and going against a family, and my dad, a physician, my mother, a medical researcher, my sister, a labor and delivery nurse. The easy part was the birth, because I did grasp that concept of what it means to just allow. In other areas of my life, I would say that I just kind of feel my way through things. And I think, to me, like getting into that zone where you're sort of having fun, which I talked about with the broccoli spears thing, that was my most successful article. Because I sort of just got in this fun zone, and the energy started flowing and the words just sort of came. And it is, I think, a matter of just sort of feeling your way through life and knowing when to, maybe paying attention to your impulses and to your dreams and to your intuition, and knowing when do I allow and when do I, like they say, make a miracle happen and allow a miracle to happen. And I mean, it's something that, to tell you the truth, I still struggle with to a degree. Like, how much do I know what to do? I remember once my husband, we went to gambling in the mountains. And he said, okay, now walk around to the machines and just see what calls out to you. I walk around the machines. I go up to a machine. I put $100 in and I lose it. He walks up and just feeling his way through, and he puts $100 in a machine and bells start going off and $4,500, And the next morning, he's like, okay, pick another one. I pick one and I lose $100. He sits down next to me and wins $500. Something like, for him, he doesn't have resistance to money. And apples, he's won. He doesn't have that resistance there. And so for him, he gets into some kind of a flow. For me, I don't have resistance in birth. That's not my battleground, as Seth says, And sometimes we all do kind of have our battlegrounds where things will, we can try and try and try. I don't know. What I do try to do is think about my births a lot and that state that I was able to get in. And I do try to apply it to other areas of my life. But it is really still a process for me, and learning how I think so much of it gets back to self-approval. And how I'm still to this day realizing I am enough, I'm good enough. And what EJ talked about, and just, approving of yourself. And the more you approve of yourself, the more these magical things come into our lives.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Beautiful, Ty.
It's such a blending of action and non-action, of acting on the impulse, but then completely surrendering the outcome. It's such a beautiful dance. Yeah.
Absolutely. Another question here. This one is referring to the information in your introduction, Laura, that in your intro, you mentioned that you healed cavities in your teeth. How did that happen? And how long did it take you to do that? Teeth feel so solid and crystallized. How on earth?
Well, everything is alive. Like they say, even everything has consciousness. Why should we assume that our teeth don't have consciousness? When I was growing up, I usually had 6 to 8 cavities every time I went to the dentist. And I was so terrified of dentists and doctors that my mother wouldn't tell me we were going to the dentist until we pulled into the parking lot. But when in 1990, I hadn't been to the dentist in a few years, and I wasn't going to doctors, but I decided I'd go to the dentist. I went to the dentist, and he said I needed about $1,000 worth of dental work, and that I had 8 cavities. So I decided to take a year, and I did not try really hard. I basically looked at, why am I attacking my teeth? And I realized that I had struggled with my weight a good amount of my life. And I felt like I attacked my teeth as part of my anger towards myself, that I'm eating too much. And maybe if I attack my teeth, I don't know, somehow I felt that anger at myself was coming out in that way. I also felt that my worry, the way some people get holes in their stomach, they get ulcers or whatever, I felt like I was getting holes in my teeth. When you are continually triggering fight, flight, you turn off digestion, you turn off birth. Your body's trying to save your life. It's, as I said, it's sending blood and oxygen into the arms and legs. It doesn't send it to your digestive system. So you stop digesting food sits in your stomach, which is why if you tell your child sugar is bad for you, and then they eat sugar, then they get a stomach ache because you've told them it's bad, and they basically stop digestion. Well, what you also stop is saliva production, because that's the first step in the digestive process. So if you're in a continual state of fear, or you're about to give a speech, your mouth might get really dry because you've turned off digestion, you've turned off saliva production. Saliva production is one of the things that helps with protecting our teeth, that saliva protects our teeth. If you're in a state of fear all the time, your teeth are more vulnerable. So that's just on a physiological level. But on a psychological level, I said, okay, I'm going to visualize the holes filling back in. I didn't do it a lot. I didn't do it 5 minutes a day. I know Seth, I just basically every so often, whenever I thought about it, I visualized the holes filling back in. I told myself that I loved myself, that I was not going to attack my teeth anymore. I went back a year later. Basically, at that point, I was like, I'd better go face the music. And the dentist took x-rays, and I thought, just fill the worst ones first, which shows you I did have some doubt. But he said, what did you do? And he held the x-rays, and he said, here's where the holes were, and here's where they're not. So he said, new tooth had filled in. So for me, once again, it was more a matter of not resisting. Like, why do we feel, we live in a society that is, when it comes to dentistry, it's drill and fill. And I think especially when I was a child, you have the slightest little cavity and my teeth are just filled with fillings, I've hardly had anything since 1990. It just was like, okay, I just let my body work the way it was designed. I opened my book with the quote from Seth, miracles are nature unimpeded. And that was what I felt like I did with the births, what I did with my teeth. It wasn't that I tried really hard. I didn't do a lot of things. I basically just didn't impede the miracle. And now, as I've said, I've done it more successfully in some areas of my life than in others, and that's still I didn't expect to be in this place after reading Seth all these years. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have everything I want. By the time I'm 30, my life is just going to be perfect. And no, it still is a process. I'm still learning. I still have resistance, but I try to focus on the areas where I have been able to let go of that resistance and have that trust.
Yes, and have that inform and sort of feed those areas that perhaps where you feel more resistance.
Right.
Just in hearing the stories that you related, it seems that you engage in a very critical practice that's subtle, but yet very, very powerful. You ask a question of yourself, that you question what has been offered to you, let's say by the U.S. healthcare system or by neighbors or by dentists. So how do you step into that space of asking questions? For example, when the vomiting, you say, oh, it must mean this, and then you get the insight to work on self-love or allowing or whatever it is. So how do you relate to that practice of asking questions and then getting the
getting to the belief, to what's
Right.
generating.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
I do things like paying attention to when I'm walking down the street and I hear a bit of a conversation. I pay attention to that. People that strike up conversations with me, being aware of a feeling I'm having. Oh, I don't feel good right now, emotionally or whatever, trying to trace it back to the thought that initiated that.
Right.
But I guess I'm just I'm an analytical person. And if something doesn't make sense to me, when I know Seth talks about people see things as truths, they don't recognize them as beliefs. So the thing about
Exactly.
pregnancy and you vomit, and some people say, well, it's you're getting rid of toxins,
Right.
and people have gotten on my case because I put in my book that I ate whatever I wanted when I was pregnant, and I said I ate M&Ms, and somebody wrote to me, or I met somebody, and she's like, oh, you're the M&M lady. And it was like, that was the one thing that stood out to her, because no, you're not supposed to eat sugar. Sugar is bad for you. Mm-hmm. And I've even met many Seth people who were still saying, I create my own reality, but sugar is bad for you. It will rot your teeth. This is, I have cleaned up my diet. Like, I have a well-balanced diet, but I just believed Seth, when I read Seth, and it just was like natural for me, I guess, to just question everything. And if something didn't make sense to me, like vomiting during pregnancy, very few people know that 50% of women in the world do not vomit during pregnancy. Some people would say, well, they have a better diet. Well, here's me and my M&Ms, I ate whatever I wanted. And you look in my book, there's no diet advice. It's eat what feels right to you. And I just, in moderation, I didn't sit there all day with my chips and M&Ms, but I just felt like people give so much power to food and not enough power to their own beliefs.
Yes.
Oh, my word.
What you believe about what you eat is more important than what you eat. And so I just think it's just natural for me to question anything that and that didn't feel right to me, that you should vomit. And it didn't feel right to me that birth should be the most horrendous thing that a woman goes through. Why? There's no, when people say, well, we've evolved and our heads are too big. And, my first husband was 6'8". I'm 5'4". And people said, you are going to have these huge babies that are going to rip you apart. I have these little 6-pounders, 1 7-pounder, but it's like, I just trusted I will grow a baby that's the right size for my body. And even big babies, though, if you are relaxed and unafraid, genitals are designed to expand, and we see it in men. Well, it happens in women. So it's just trusting that there is an intelligence behind and within us, and it's not stupid. And the fact that sometimes we get sick or sometimes things go wrong does not prove that the larger consciousness is stupid or that the larger consciousness doesn't exist. It's that we have not learned how to cooperate with that larger consciousness.
Yes.
And that's okay. We're learning, and we're going to stumble. And as Seth says, you can't kick away the old belief systems. It's going to take a long time. I thought my book was going to be a bestseller. I did find a publisher pretty quickly, and I was like, my book went into bookstores, and now it's going to be a bestseller, and like nobody bought it, although it's still in print. But it's I have learned that it's taking society. It's going to take each of us individually a while. We have to be patient with ourselves and with society, because this is a whole new way of thinking, and we just have to be patient.
And
there's that sense of zero insistence on a particular outcome, and just that's that allowing part, and just let it materialize the way it needs to after we've taken the action on the impulses. And it's beautiful, the curiosity. That's what I use, is what would I have to believe is true, always questioning, why am I getting this reality? And I really loved how you brought in the vomiting, like relating that to your fear of being a mother, being a good mother. Like, that's just amazing to be able to make that link between the belief system and the physiological response that, quote unquote, is a normal part, that other people define it that way. So great. Yeah. Do we have time for more?
Well, that's it.
Yeah,
we're going a tiny bit over.
Right.
So no
yeah.
worries. But thank you so much, Laura. Just delightful and wondrous.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for coming out here directly, at least. Yeah. So we'll do more, and we'll definitely be in touch. And so now we're going to transition to our next segment. Welcome back, everybody. It is time for our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mary Fahey. She is, as many of our speakers, a longtime Seth reader since 1974. She has been a lone reader for over 20 years, but then she enjoyed coming out and meeting other fellow Seth readers at the Colorado Seth Conference. And as many of us, she found the Seth books life-changing and life-enriching. Moving from administration to teaching, Mary was able to take her work into mainstream teaching in London, England, where she now lives. And her teaching work was and still is inspired by the large body of the Seth material. Mary has a very practical, intuitive, down-to-earth approach to her work and life, and believes in teaching and learning through joy, which is what I believe in, so great. She conducted numerous courses, workshops, inner journeys, lectures, talks, and personal consultations in the US and the UK, and she's been featured in the media. Now semi-retired, she had a 2-hour weekly show on the community radio station entitled Seth Through the Back Door. She also enjoyed hosting a monthly Seth group that ran for a good 8 years. And now, today, coming from England, Mary will be speaking on, her talk will be titled Once Upon a Seth Book, Life Changes. So let's give Mary a very heartfelt and warm welcome to our etheric, to our virtual stage here at the California Seth Conference.
So this is Mary Fahey from London, and I'm going to kickstart my talk by reading the lovely Psychic Manifesto, just an extract from our Jane Roberts. And magically, Kate and Ashara have made it so that it's in front of the Seth house. So I'm there really. A Psychic Manifesto. My life is its own definition. So is yours. Let us leave the priests to their hells and heavens and confine the scientists to their dying universe with its accidentally created stars. Let us each dare to open our dream's door and explore the unofficial thresholds where we begin. This is Mary Fahey here from London, England. And for my second segment of the presentation today, I've called it Once Upon a Seth Book, Life Changes, Big Time, because it's true for me. So why me, why now, you may ask? Well, I thought, Mr. Biden over there is, I hear he's 78 years old and he thinks he can run America. Well, has anyone given him the book? And I'm 77 in London town, and I thought, I'll give a go at this Zoom fandango and present at the Seth Conference in San Francisco. Okay. So, why did I choose the book, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events, you may ask? Well, in many respects, it chose me. So let's just give you a bit of background. I'll tell you the story. Last March, we had lockdown discussed here in London, which I have to say I didn't really believe, but it did happen. Life changed quite dramatically, the isolation and so on. But I went about my day as best I could, and during that time, I went to bed one night and found myself dreaming of a Seth book. Yes, it was The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. I woke up in the morning and, chose to duck it really. I thought there's no significance here. went about my day. The second night, again, I went off to bed. And once again, I found myself dreaming of reading that book, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. And this time in the morning, there was a significance. It was a sharper dream, a much brighter dream, a fuller dream. And the content of the dream stayed with me, although I couldn't remember the content of the book. So the third night, I went to bed again. And this time, dreaming of the book, I woke up dreaming of the book. And so with a sigh, I'll go and get that book. So I came downstairs, went to my bookcase, and there the book was, shining at me, waiting to be picked up, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. So I picked it up, went back to bed, opened it, and it's all about the pandemic, viruses, earthquakes. I can't share this. I can't read this now. I couldn't put it down. So I must have read it for about an hour, with my mouth open. And in the morning, still anxious about the content and not feeling able to share it, I rang my younger sister. And she was the only one at that time who was reading the Seth books along with me. Otherwise, I was a total solo reader. And she'd ring up every now and again and go, Mary, have you got another Seth book yet? Because in those days, the 80s and 90s, we had to wait 6 months for a copy, would you believe, coming over from America. Counting the days. Anyway, I told her about the content of the book just briefly, and she said, I think that should be shared, Mary, it's important. I thought, well, no relief there, because I still didn't feel confident about sharing it with anyone, because the pace of getting a vaccine, getting tested, make sure you've got enough masks, be clear about distancing, stay at home, was all the rage here. So I quietly carried on reading it bit by bit, going about my days. And out of the blue, I got an email from America from my friend Mike, who's in California. We've gone to many Seth conferences together, had lovely times, especially the one in Elmira, where these books were written by Jane Roberts. And in his email, out of the blue, he invited me to attend a Seth conference in California by Zoom. And I thought, because I used to run Seth groups for many years. And I thought, I will. Even though it was near my bedtime, it was 9 p.m. in the evening, 1 o'clock California time. So I zoomed in, and Paul, the host of the Seth group, warmly welcomed me and asked me how London town was and so on. And I just told him how I dreamt about reading the book. And it seemed immediately he suggested we change the book we're reading and we'll start reading that, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. I was a bit taken aback, but also I felt pleased. Relieved, really. And at the end of the session, as I went off to bed, I realised how much lighter I felt. And I thought, this Seth group, these people are seasoned Seth readers. They'll sort it out. They'll help me out. And I felt safe. God, did I sleep well that night. So I continued attending Seth group meetings in San Francisco every 2 weeks, not every time, because sometimes I just fell asleep before it started. And one of the weeks, Jeff, one of the members, just said, almost in passing, it seems to me, that they were thinking of doing a Seth conference by Zoom. And it was just amazing to me how I found myself automatically saying, I want to present. It was like a light bulb moment. I want to present at that conference. And here I am. Well, it's just to recap there, the 3 easy steps, easy and effortless, apart from me ignoring the wake-up calls by the dreams. Then the email, and then the setup of the Seth Conference, all given to me. And I have to say that's Linda Dahl, lovely woman who I really believe is a sister of mine in another lifetime, set up the Seth Network International along with other colleagues. She's written many books, and one of the books is 1,000 Whispers. Well, I've got to tell you, Linda, I don't hear the whispers, love. I seem to need shouts 3 times this time round. Okay, so the individual and nature of mass events. And all of Seth's books are long titles. I mean, they take a day to digest, never mind any of the content. But just think of that wonderful title. I love it. The individual and nature of mass events. For me, it implies that we are all connected, and we're all equal too. And I want to give a first quote now from The Codicils by Jane Roberts, from her book Psychic Politics. And think of that in the 70s, writing a book called Psychic Politics. Love it. Wonderful woman, wonderful book. I'm just going to read, there's about 10 or 11 codicils. I sort of compare them to the 10 Commandments, if you like, that all start with thou shalt not. These are more affirmative, and this one is my favourite. All of creation is sacred and alive, each part connected to each other part, and each communicating in a creative cooperative commerce in which the smallest and the largest are equally involved. Smallest and the largest are equally involved. And that to me, apart from the wonder of the equality and the cooperation, it implies that the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, have all got lives of their own too, and they're all part of it. So we've got to step up to the plate sometime to actually respect all life, haven't we? So the book, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events, I'm going to just refer to it as mass events from now on because it's such a mouthful. It's in 4 parts. I'm not going to do the whole part because obviously we'd be here for a fortnight. But I'm going to bring out the what I see as the important parts. And I've done my best to highlight it. And because we're still in lockdown, I haven't been able to photocopy because our printer is out of order here. I haven't been able to photocopy the extract, so I've had to sort of put cards in with. Anyway, so where am I? Now, the first chapter, let me just read the title of that one. The chapters alone, the titles are enough. Part 1, the events of nature, epidemics and natural disasters. Chapter 1, the natural body and its defences. Again, it implies we've got our own defences. I just love it. Okay. Let's start. The question of epidemics, for example, cannot be answered from a biological standpoint alone. It involves great sweeping psychological attitudes on the part of many and meets the needs and desires of those involved. Needs which, in your terms, arise in a framework of religious, psychological, and cultural realities that cannot be isolated from biological results. So I think in our time right now, we are just looking at it all from a biological standpoint. You know, the droplets in the air, we can breathe them in. Look at the vaccine so that you can give you a little drop of the virus to create our own immunity. But there's something else going on as well. And what Seth actually says, and I really find myself in sympathy with it, it's about social change. You know, there's a lot of hardship going on right now, isn't there? And I want to start by highlighting the plague, which again was in the UK, and why it was decimating. I remember doing it at school. And here it goes. To a certain extent, epidemics are the result of a mass suicide phenomenon on the parts of those involved. Oh. In some historical periods, the plight of the poor was so horrible, so unendurable, that outbreaks of the plague occurred. literally resulting in a complete destruction of large areas of the environment in which, here we go, such social, political, and economic conditions existed. Those plagues took rich and poor alike. However, so the complacent, well-to-do could see quite clearly, for example, that to some extent sanitary conditions, privacy, peace of mind had to be granted to the poor alike, for the results of their dissatisfaction would have quite practical results. Those deaths were deaths of protest. And interestingly, with the plague, I remember vaguely at school about how the social chain came in. There was no sewage systems. I mean, can you imagine? But all those structures by the survivors who actually became in contact with the people who were affected, or the devastation just near their area, really took a constructive effort to make a huge difference for rich and poor alike. So the sewage systems were set up, travel was set up, and so on. So and of course there's always been the talk about, thank goodness diseases are catching, because everybody will kind of look after each other. Yeah. Here we are. The environment in which an outbreak occurs points at the political, sociological, and economic conditions that have evolved, causing such disasters. Often such outbreaks take place after ineffective political or social action. That is, after some unified mass social protest has failed or is considered hopeless. They often occur also in wartime on the part of the populace that is against a given war in which its country is involved. And it reminds me of the Jarrow marches here in England, from Newcastle and up north. Many people after the First World War en masse marched to London, hundreds of miles. They were starving, and the only way they could bring the truth of their dilemma was to get to the House of Parliament, our legislative bodies in London. And as a result of those marches, more work was created, better living standards were created, they built more houses, so it's a shame that we seem to need to have these big protests to actually effect change, but that seems a way of it right now. Still staying with the chapter 1, the natural body, says the epidemics then serve many purposes, warning that certain conditions will not be tolerated. There is a biological outrage that will be continually expressed until the conditions are changed. Amazing, because that really reminds me of that Jarrow March. They were outraged when they passed the Ritz Hotel and saw the wealth and the opulence there. And apparently, so rumour has it, that some of the men just barged in there. I don't know whether that's true or not, but anyway, the conditions did change. And also, epidemics, by their public nature, speak of public problems. So it's food for thought, don't you think? Okay, we're moving on now to chapter 2, headed Mass Meditations, in quotes, health, close quotes, plans for disease, epidemics of beliefs, and effective mental inoculations against despair. And just let's think about that title. I've never thought of epidemics of beliefs. We think about epidemics on the physical plane, don't we? Not on the mental sphere of our beliefs and our thoughts and our thinking. And going back to getting the book that night, I looked in the front of the book and I'd purchased it in 1996, which is 25 years ago. And with each Seth book, I had to read them twice. The first time, it was too deep and indigestible. The second time reading, got some of the gist. I obviously saw this book as something historical, maybe hysterical, but certainly not affecting me in any way. It was written in America, nothing to do with London. But when I picked it up this time, it was all alive in 3D. So epidemics of beliefs, how about that? Just the thought of that makes you change how you think. And mental inoculations against despair. Well, we always talk about inoculations and vaccines, giving you the minute dose of the actual disease so that you can build up your immune system, which we have to say has worked pretty effectively in terms of TB, smallpox, scarlet fever, and so on. But Seth gives another dynamic about social change. So if we start with that and change our social structures, maybe we won't need to look at vaccines. Who knows? Oh, yes. Oh, this is an interesting snippet. I laughed out loud. It's still in the chapter 2. It's under the mass meditations part. On a conscious level, and with your conscious reserves alone, you couldn't keep your body alive for an hour. How about that? You wouldn't know how to do it. For your life flows through you automatically and spontaneously. You take the details for granted. And we do, don't we? We don't have to say, hold on, I've just got to take a few breaths now. It's a given. The breathing, the inner mechanisms of nourishment and elimination, the circulation, and the maintenance of your psychological continuity. All of that is taken for granted, taken care of for you in Framework 2. Just to touch on Framework 2 that Seth talks about. Framework 2 is his term for the inner world, the inner life, the God part, the soul part. For me, it's where our wisdom resides, readily available when we allow and accept and ask for it. Framework 1 is our physical bodies, which apparently wouldn't last for an hour without the backup of Framework 2. How about that? So on the note of it all being taken care of, I'd like to give you, because I'm sprinkling in around other books as well as the Seth book and James, about how we're taken care of, comes to mind from Psychic Politics, James' book. What a wonderful title, Psychic Politics. A poem called The Sumari Healing Song. And I'm just going to read the opening verse. While you were sleeping, all the cupboards of the earth were filled. Mother Earth sought out each need. Read the rest when you have time. It's a beautiful, enabling poem. And it just makes me so clear that we're taken care of. And that God didn't run out when it was your turn or my turn. All the goodies are there for all of us. And what is even better, that Seth's doctrine implies that your gain isn't my loss. My gain isn't your loss. In fact, your gain is my gain. And fulfillment and better is for all of us. Cooperation really does reign, you know. And going on about Framework 1 and Framework 2 again, I'm going to quote from Rob Butts, the co-author of the Seth books, who did all the transcribing. And he did a little story, if you like, and he called it his credo, and they both used it to actually make Framework 2 become more alive in their life. And he starts his credo, and they've got it on their wall apparently. I have the simple, profound faith that anything I desire in this life can come to me from Framework 2. There are no impediments in Framework 2. Framework 2 can creatively produce everything I desire. And he goes on to details. Well, for me, I do a simpler version. As much as I know how to and I catch myself, I think and expect the best. And often that the old way was to prepare for the worst. But I've decided I'm going to dump that bit. I just expect the best. And obviously in my life I have challenges, difficulties and pain and so on. But I try as much as I can to look for the gift there. And that works for me. And in terms of bringing Framework 2 alive, you can look at, I hope you'll find the next segment on the 4 I's, all inner work, the impulses, inspiration, intuition, inner knowing. And I see that as a gestalt for imagination. Because of course our imagination creates our world. There we are, that's the credo, Rob's credo. This was one I couldn't quite digest, and I'm still working with it, but we're still, we've moved to myths and physical events. I quote, objectively, whatever the appearances, storms, earthquakes, floods, etc., are quite necessary to the well-being of the earth. Well, the only context I can put it in is that when we have a heavy rain downpour, there's a lovely sweetness in the air. There's a real clearing and freshness in the air. And the grass seems to grow quicker. The flowers open and bloom afterwards. But it's when the rain doesn't stop that becomes a tsunami that's a bit of a challenge. But I'll leave that with you. And of course, again, in the change of seasons, in the wintertime, animals, being wise, many of them hibernate. And over the years as I've got older, I tend to slow right down in the wintertime. Curl up in front of the fire, read a book, leave the outside, because it's much warmer and cosier inside. So there's sort of the downtime and the electric uptime, isn't it? Where are we now? This chapter is referring to Framework 2. But I just love the idea that Seth talks about how, and we know this because when we're born as children, we never have to say, oh, I hope my skin doesn't grow too long on my hands, do we? Or our one leg is, moving out sideways. It's all uniform and beautiful, isn't it? So he says at birth, each person is automatically equipped with the capacity toward natural growth that will most completely satisfy its own abilities, not at the expense of others, but an overall context in which the fulfillment of each individual assures the fulfillment of each other individual. Oh, I love that. And let's imagine it's true. Make our place a different place, wouldn't we? Although competition with yourself is healthy, but competition replaced largely by cooperation. And this is another pause to actually read another quote from Jane Roberts, the poem Self-Love, Self-Expression and Poetry from her book, If We Live Again. When we are young children, we are in love with ourselves in a way that perhaps animals are, almost unthinkingly, automatically enjoying ourselves as states of being. The sounds and sensations of our own bodies delight us, and in our acceptance of ourselves, we add to the enjoyment of other people who watch our innocent absorption. And that's so true to life, isn't it? You can see young children, they don't know how to walk. They skip and jump and hop, don't they? Full of life. Like the animals, the dog that charges after you and looks at you with big eyes for the tiniest morsel. Magic. Moving on here. We've reached the section, the mechanics of experience. It's chapter 5. Your world and everything in it exists first in the imagination. You have been taught to focus all of your attention upon physical events so that they carry the authenticity of reality for you. Thoughts, feelings, or beliefs appear to be secondary, subjective, or somehow not real, and they seem to rise in response to an already established field of physical data. You usually think, for example, that your feelings about a given event are primarily reactions to the event itself, but Seth talks about it being the other way round. It seldom occurs to you that the feelings themselves might be primary, and that the particular event was somehow a response to your emotions, rather than the other way around. So that's really interesting that, the thoughts, our beliefs, feed our world, feed our experiences. So it's a good idea to look at our beliefs and thoughts, eventually. Because, the world is created through our imagination. And the feelings are the measure of how we are. If we feel good, that's great. We attract good to us. If we feel bad, we attract the stuff that's not so good for us or called negative. And it's worth looking at our thoughts and our feelings to make the measure about our own personal well-being. Seth says your feelings, however, cause the events you perceive. Secondarily, you do, of course, then react to those events. Moving on. Where are we? Positive and negative behaviour. Where are we? Oh, yeah. The good, the bad, and the catastrophic is the year. There is nothing more stimulating, more worthy of actualization than the desire to change the world for the better. That is indeed each person's mission. You begin by working in that area of activity that is your own unique one, with your own life and activities. You begin in the corner of an office, or on the assembly line, or in the advertising agency, or in the kitchen. You begin where you are. You begin where you are. When you fulfill your own abilities, when you express your personal idealism through acting it out to the best of your abilities in your daily life, then you are changing the world for the better. Well, go to it, isn't it? So, summing up if I can, the pandemic, COVID-19 as it's called sometimes, what was its purpose? Everything must have a purpose for me. So for me now, with the understanding that I have, the purpose of the pandemic was social change for the better. There's been an awful lot of hardship. And, I can go out any day now. I go for my walks because it's very limited access, but I go for my walks and I always find someone sleeping rough. That certainly wasn't the case when I was growing up. So there's been huge changes, not always for the good, that's caused hardship and that we've got to address as a nation, as a people. And so I really would like to see social change for the better. And I like the word socialism, although it often gets a bad press. It basically means sharing what's available with everyone. I think we're socialists at home. We look after each other, we help each other, we pick each other up, don't we? Wouldn't it be wonderful if the whole community can adopt socialism? Well, it only means sharing what's available, sharing it for all. After all, as Seth says, we're practicing idealists. I love that. So let's give up blaming. Transmute, if you can, your feelings of anger. And importantly, anger is a natural phenomenon. It's a good release, but it's your emotion, no one else's. So don't give your anger to others. You know, if you feel you need to release the pent-up feelings, get in front of a mirror. I do it. How dare you speak to me, or whatever it is that's working you. And in a few minutes, you can feel the release of that anger. Sometimes compassion comes in, sometimes it doesn't. But you can share the feelings with an equanimity that you couldn't when there's anger behind it. And along with the anger, look at the word selfish. I'd like that taken out of the dictionary, please, and be replaced by a healthy self-interest. It has far more of a positive outlook. And this healthy self-interest is good for us, it's good for all of us. Our own well-being always starts first. Seth says, start where you are. And finally, nearly finally, gifts of the virus. Well, for me, it's like a wake-up call. Priorities have to change. There's too much hardship, increasing homelessness, wars are still going on, or mass murders, as Seth calls them. We have to change our priorities. I've certainly changed mine since the lockdown, which we're still here in London town, to really change my values, that me time is good for me, that I can have quiet time of reflection, of just sitting, looking out the window, doing nothing, but the imagination, that film inside rolling. I look inwards much more naturally. And when I look outwards, I'm more aware of nature, more aware of the sky and the earth, seeing the aliveness in the trees, having far more compassion for my fellow humans, well, most of them. And I want to say what I've really noticed over the last few years, really, is the quickening in our young ones. They seem to get this inner work far more spontaneously. It never really was spontaneous for me. I had to have it knocked into my inside door. So I want to finish now with a lovely poem, if I can find it. You are born loving. And it's from the book The Nature of Massive Events. And take it in at a deep level. You are born loving. You are born compassionate. You are born curious about yourself and your world. Those attributes also belong to natural law. You are born knowing that you possess a unique, intimate sense of being that is itself, that seeks its own fulfillment and the fulfillment of others. I love that line. That seeks its own fulfillment and the fulfillment of others. You are born seeking the actualization of the ideal. You are born seeking to add value to the quality of life, to add characteristics, energies, abilities to life that only you individually can contribute to the world, and to attain a state of being that is uniquely yours, while adding to the value fulfillment of the world. All these qualities and attributes are given you by natural law. You are a cooperative species, and you are a loving one. There we are.
Okay.
And here we are. We're here with Mary. And so we're very glad to have her here all the way from England. And so we're about to have this nice, lovely Q&A interaction. We've got some good questions queued up. So I'm going to hand it over to Lilia. Let's bring in the first question.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. And thank you so much, Mary. So to begin, how do you see your role in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic? You hold certain beliefs. You're a reader of Seth. So how do you see your role?
Well, it's a bit of a nuisance, isn't it, the whole damn thing? But I'm not a bit surprised that there was some sort of gross dilemma, because the bitter disappointment about Brexit over here and the loss of a possible socialist leader, and conversely in America, Sanders being knocked out of the race, I felt a real sense of depression about that. But so that being said, when the pandemic came out, I found it very difficult to believe it would go anywhere. But obviously I couldn't have been more wrong. But following on from, there's a couple of questions about the vaccine, and it's my take on it, but I'm very uncomfortable about having the vaccine because I feel it's being imposed on me and I don't need it. I haven't had it to date. I'm in the situation of being in the seniors category. So my GP, my doctor, is ringing me every day to ask me to come into the surgery for the vaccination. And I've just said I haven't made up my mind yet. Obviously, I'm not going to be a martyr and not be able to go to restaurants or to travel or go and see my family because I have to show a vaccine certificate. If I have to, I will have it, and I know that I'll be fine with it. But it's not my choice. I resent the lack of choice because it's getting really quite, well, it's almost like a hysteria to me about people are whooping up over the moon that they've got the vaccine, and I'm the opposite. And so I just have to say, well, I'm really pleased you're getting what you want. But I honestly don't share it publicly that I don't want the vaccine. But we'll see. You'll have to watch this space.
Definitely. So again, if you could elaborate just a little bit on how you then inoculate yourself against the despair. How do you do that? Then again, in the face of everything that's happening and Bernie Sanders was not elected and so on and so forth. So how do you inoculate yourself against that mentally, emotionally, and physically?
I mean, largely, I think I compared it initially with the flu. Now, we have seasons of the flu, and I know Seth talks about that. But, so I've been hounded for about 7 years to have the flu vaccine. I've got the choice, and I've said, no, thank you. And I've never had the flu. So there we go. Now, for me, in terms of, I know it will pass. It's not going to be permanent. It's not static. It's not going to go on forever and ever, although it felt like it with the lockdown. We're still in lockdown here, but tomorrow things are going to open up a bit. So I have the firm belief that it will pass, and I'm still here. And I still feel that I can be totally comfortable with people having the vaccine and trying to persuade me to do it. And I've learnt the line now. Let's agree to differ. I'm very well. You're very well. You've had the vaccine. I might have to have it, but we're both well. So let's move on. Let's talk about the technique. So I don't actually I don't think I've ever had despair about it, but people who've actually been isolated where I live here, I mean, the way I go through it is on very practical terms. I'll cook them dinner and deliver it with a mask on, don't go in. I use their dishes and not my. And so it's the practical approach that I think I'm alive to and used to doing. Does that answer some of it? Or
Yes, definitely. Just sort of in your day to day. And just sort of as a follow up, do you experience or have you experienced the societal impact of the epidemic in your body? I mean, there's the phenomenon of, okay, I didn't get COVID, but because we're experiencing mass events, do you experience the other impacts of these mass events in your body?
Well, that's interesting because, well, I've had a lot of fatigue. And
yes.
I think it was initially, I mean, this is just me looking back on the top of my head, too much information about the virus. We've got the three clowns, or MP and the Prime Minister, talking about what you have to do and so on. And I found it so overwhelming and so negative that my way of dealing with it, because I thought, I must watch it, I must be responsible. But in the end, I decided, like largely with the news, not to watch it. And that has given me back my energy and my sense of well-being. And, the days are longer, I'm in the garden more. Well, I can put that book away. I mean, I told you about the intro of that. I mean, it seems as if I need to have a really loud call to actually, I'm kicking and screaming into things that are good for me to actually focus on. But I've had I think fatigue rather than the despair or depression has been my main focus. That I was shocked just how tired I was. And falling asleep in the day. I mean, I do like having an afternoon nap because that's when I do my side time, but it was more than that. But that seems to have passed. I think I just tune into the coronavirus about once a week, but it's on about 6 times a day. Does that help?
Yes, definitely. So we have a question here also about, again, you talked about the differing opinions and you hinted at, well, for the folks who are in a lot of fear, kind of offering comfort. I believe it's Oana Dimitropol. Sorry, I don't mean to massacre the names there. She's asking, how can we bring comfort to the ones who are in fear, especially when our opinions about the pandemic are very different?
Well, firstly, I won't give my opinions. I think by your example, your own sense of well-being, that's what radiates out to people, I think. And I mean, there's a couple of people here, because this is a, sheltered housing, so we're all seniors. A couple of people have been very low. Well, I've gone and bought some daffodils. I think to actually give an outward sign of something of beauty in nature rather than giving my 2 pennies that I know won't be received well. I mean, some of my family really identify with the Seth books, but the majority don't. Why do I have to beat myself up to try and proselytize it? I don't do it. I might have done. Got my fingers burnt. But I think the practical, like doing a bit of dinner, having a cuppa in the garden, sitting on a bench with the masks, is far more helpful and reassuring and calming than, some lecture about what I think. Unless someone specifically asks, why don't you want the vaccine? And I go, well, I compare it to the flu jab. I've never had the flu, well, for years, and I believe I won't have COVID. But that's me. But that's how I leave it.
And how do you find that the person that you're engaging with,
I'm just going to follow on. Yes, they don't accept it. Mary, you won't be able to go into cafes. You won't. I said, I'll have to take that on board. And if need be, I'll have to have the thing, but I'll be kicking and screaming. But no, the majority of people who've had the vaccine here don't agree with me at all. So I just say it in passing, and they'll say, have you had the vaccine? I said, no, I'm still thinking about it. And that's the truth. But I mean, I want to go to America reinvigorated with all this one more time with Katie. And I'll have to have the jab. I mean, get over it, Mary, you know. I'm not going to make it another thing to work with.
Definitely. Mary, is there, you have such a beautiful value for, or a value of the simple things, the day to day, reaching out to people where they are, offering beauty, offering sort of listening ear. That is so touching. For yourself, what do you do? How do you keep yourself in this space so that you can be giving to people as you do? What is there a practice that you? That,
yes, I mean I meditate really every morning. Yeah, I meditate every morning, but I think the biggest thing. I mean, I'm so enveloped in the Seth philosophy that we create our own reality. That we're here to learn through joy. And you don't have to pick up other people's problems. So as best I can, I don't actually move into their problem. I hear it, but you know, sometimes you get more sucked in than you would want. But I've got an optimism through the Seth books that I never had, even when I was a practicing Catholic going to Mass every morning in my teenage years. I never had that euphoria that you read 5 minutes of Seth and I mean you're on cloud 9. You know, I mean, look at that line, you know, you won't last 5 minutes without the backup of framework to it. It just makes me laugh out loud, you know. We're so connected and I'm not frightened of death anymore. Because I always felt as a child having to go to confession and not knowing what sins to say I had as a young child, that I'd go to heaven for being dishonest about that. But now I'm not. I mean, obviously I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of people and I've had out of bodies and I've had past lives and all the rest of it, but it's another chapter, isn't it? It's not something to dread.
Yeah, so you've really touched upon a beautiful way of holding the space with people. I don't need to proselytize. I don't need to be right. I don't need to have you change so that I can be in my joy, so that I can connect.
You're a born orator, you are. You'll need to come on the next session.
With joy, Mary, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. I'll hold you to that.
Now, is there one last thing? You know, we just got a minute left. Just one last thing that you want to really remind us of or emphasize?
Start where you are. I think that's the biggest gift, to be reminded of that. You know, okay, you wish you'd have done this, you could have done that, I handled that badly. Start where you are.
Absolutely.
And begin to build on that trust. You know, we're taken care of. And on the talk, because I had to turn it off to come on this level, did the 4 eyes come up in the talk or not? Oh, right. And the guided meditation.
Yeah, we weren't able
to receive it. I'll have to send it, however. Yeah, because I think the 4 eyes is how I practice, you know, impulses, inspiration, intuition, and inner knowing. The catalyst for the imagination.
Beautiful. Yes, this is excellent. We will follow up.
That's excellent.
Yeah. And that glass of wine is calling me now.
Oh, yes. That's one of my favorites.
Sure. Thank you again. I see these Mary. 3 people, listeners, as pioneers. You've done a wonderful job. It's been seamless and so professional. I'm knocked out.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you,
Jeff. Yes. Oh, my goodness. And Tom, of course. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, absolutely. The whole shebang.
Thank you.
Oh, I forgot. Can I just say, I wanted to thank the Seth Group because they're actually, dear Seth members, you did more than you know in making me have the confidence to do this presentation. So thank you.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. I'm glad I said that. Yeah, it's true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Looking forward.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Kiefer, and I'm one of the conference organizers. While working with our archive videos, I discovered the most asked about presentation in our collection. The one where Mary Dillman interviews Lawrence Davidson, and that was from our 2015 conference. It was the last time they were both together. We lovingly present this interview as a tribute and remembrance for them both. So without keeping you waiting, here they are.
We're going to spend the next hour or so, I believe, with Mary, who is going to be interviewing Lawrence, and we're going to hear all the fabulous stories of being a New York boy, yeah?
A 65-year-old.
Excellent. Welcome to your own stage.
Thank you. Oh, I guess this goes to her.
Thanks. I just have it.
You didn't do that for me. No. Okay.
So, Lawrence.
Wait a minute.
No, I'm white.
Oh, you're wired.
So I understand you were part of the New York group that went up to visit Jane.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But you also told me that you were interested in talking about how you've been using the material and
Oh, okay.
how it affected
All
you
right,
now.
that's what we were going to talk about tonight. Okay. Well, I think I need to start with backing up and trying not too hard to focus upon this stuff. But when I began going to class, I was in pretty bad shape, and I was almost a recovering addict, and I was a semi-recovering addict, and I was involved with this Gnostic school of teaching, and it still was a huge part of my belief system. And some of the other boys who had not been allowed into the school or had been kicked out of the school had found a way to get to Jane's class. Our pal Jeffrey Marcus had written. He had written to Jane and told her he had read the books and he was, would really like to go to class and see what it's like. So Jane said, okay. She let Jeffrey come up, and Jeffrey took a bus. And you got to remember, we were a group of guys living in. I was in Manhattan. The rest of the guys, some of us were in the Bronx, but we all grew up in Whitestone. This strange neighborhood near the Throgs Neck Bridge in Queens. And, most of those guys had known each other since kindergarten. They were incredibly bound to one another. And I was an outsider. But at any rate, I became friends with Richard Kendall, and Jeffrey, and they kind of, you know, brought me into that group. And while I was in the school, the teacher, who in Sue's book, if any of you remember in Sue's book, when they talk about the Gnostic teacher Arturo, that I was in his school, and he, the quick, cute little interesting story is he would call Jane every week. He would call. He basically was trying, like a fair amount of people, was trying to figure out ways, how do I access Seth without Jane? Because Jane knew this guy was full of shit. I mean, she just was like, you know, what's this guy's problem? And she was worried about the boys, that this guy had so much influence over us, and what he was teaching was not, in the long run, was not going to be very healthy for us. And so anyway, he was kind of like a mosquito in her ear, and she wasn't too fond of him. And he wasn't very fond of her, but he was very fond of Seth. And at any rate, Jane got worried enough about Francois that she decided to send Helper. And if everybody remembers who Helper is, Helper was one of Seth. Helper was one of Jane's attributes, buddies, powers. I don't know how you would put it. But if sometimes, you know, somebody would be really sick or whatever, and she would just think, all right, Helper, go help this person. Well, she sent Helper down to New York. Swear to God. Francois, who was just this, I said Francois, I didn't say Arturo. How about that?
Yeah.
I'm in trouble now.
No, Francois in the library.
Francois, who probably was maybe 42, 41 years old, probably a bodybuilder, just this incredibly powerful guy. He was walking down the street with his girlfriend and keeled over and dropped dead. And for quite some time after that fact, we were all, you know, you don't want to piss Jane off.
I don't think Jane was into killing people.
Yeah, and because by that point we were beginning to understand there's no coincidences, we were like, you know, you don't want to fool with Helper. And at any rate, Francois dies, and because he was dead, the school needed more males, and luckily or unluckily, they decided to let me and Rick into the school. So I was thrilled. I mean, I had gotten into the school that I really wanted to get into, and I was the sex toy for about 15 women. And I was 22 years old, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And I thought everything was pretty good. But more and more and more, the other guys who at that point, they were Ricky and Richard Kendall and Jeffrey, were becoming regulars going to Elmira. And they would have all these, at some day when the class transcripts get published, you could just see these arguments going on between Ricky and Richard about just Gnostic minutia, just, and the poor people in class just had to like, oh my God, here they go again, and that they'd be arguing about how do you get rid of this, how do you make this work with the Seth material, and you don't, and they had a really hard time realizing that. And at any rate, I think I told most of this last time, but finally, Dickie and Jeffrey they got really concerned that I was really getting sucked into the Gnostic school, and there's a pun in there. And that, they were going to have to get me out with a crowbar. And finally, they almost kidnapped me. They were like, do you want to go to class? And I said, yeah, eventually. But I was still, to me, Seth was another teacher. I didn't have, my head wrapped around exactly, what Seth was. I mean, I knew, there were a couple of books. The ESV Power, Seth Material, Seth Speaks. And when I got to class, maybe a month or two later, Oversoul 7 came out, and then Personal Reality. But those guys talked to Jane, and Jane said, yeah, you can bring a guest. And they brought me up, but they had to do it in 2 cars, because Rick would have gone ballistic. I mean, he did not want me to go, all right, because he wanted to play both sides of the field. And so at any rate, the boys took me up, and we thundered like it was like a herd of buffalo. We parked the car and flew up the stairs, because you wanted to get the couch or you wanted to get the floor right by the rocker. And I lucked out. I mean, we got there a little early. I was on the couch, but when we came in, Jane was in the rocker, and I'd run up the stairs with the other guys, and I was like, why are we running? And I walked in, and I was kind of standing there looking around, and Jane turned around and looked at me, and it was just, I know you, and I'm home. And she just smiled. This pretty magical smile, and I just knew I was home. And this gigantic weight had been taken off of my shoulders. And we sat down, and as the class went on, at one point, the argument between Ricky and Dickie starts up again. And, meanwhile, I'm kind of checking out the classmates and listening to Jane, and it was just, pretty spectacular stuff. And Seth comes through. And I did have hair on my neck at that point, and it stood up. It was just, it really, again, I apologize to you guys who've heard this over and over again, but it was truly an alien experience. And I use that word specifically. And it was just, you know, Seth came through almost barking at these guys, something about, you know why he's arguing, you both are convinced you're right, and this is why wars happen, and why don't you guys, I'm paraphrasing like crazy here, but he was basically going, when are you guys going to shut up about this stuff? And I was like, here's this thing, yelling at two of my best friends, and where's the door? Just in case. And that night, at one point, Seth looked right at me, and he mentioned something about how, you can. All right. The first words out of his mouth to me, Seth looked at me and he said, value your ego. It is a good and valuable friend. And I was like, where'd you come up with that? None of the other books I read said anything like that. I'm supposed to transcend the ego somehow or whatever. The ego wasn't particularly didn't come across as something that you really wanted to nurture or anything like that. So he did the ego thing, and at the end of his little piece about the ego, again, he's looking right at me, and he says, basically something like, you should talk to yourself or be fond of yourself as much as you would a squirrel. Now, my friends don't know anything about this stuff, right? And all my life, one of my main totems has been the squirrels. I'd look at the squirrels, and I always knew that they were very magical, and they were playing with time. It would be like I would be in my, when I lived in Elmira, I had this great tree, squirrel center, and, the cats would come into the yard and they would kind of creep up, get somewhere near the squirrels, and the squirrels would let them get pretty close, and then they'd be up on the tree chattering down, and you knew they were telling the cat, you schmuck, there's no way you're ever gonna catch me. And I was always really drawn to them. For whatever reason, they were a strong symbol of positive, powerful, running away and laughing and playing with life kind of stuff. And there was something else that night. I mean, he hit a couple of nails on the head that I just was like, my God, I got to come back here. And all night as the class went on, I knew I was going to have to, when it was all over, I was going to have to go over and ask Jane if I could come back. And I was terrified. I mean, I was terrified that she might say no. And basically I went, we were getting ready to leave, and the class had left, and the guys always kind of stayed a little longer because, we were about to go for another 5-hour drive, and Jane would, let us hang out a little while. Once in a blue moon, Seth would come through. Of course, none of that's on tape, But at any rate, I had my tail between my legs and kind of had my head down, and I was very shy at that point in life. And, I asked her if I could come back, and she smiled and she said, of course, you belong here. And, that night was definitely a high water mark, in my life. And at any rate, now that that's out of the way, but coming from that point, for the first 6 months, 8 months, or whatever it was that I was going to class, Seth spent a lot of time working on the guys from New York, tearing down this belief system that we had bought into. And, just all this completely nutso Gnostic stuff about archons and angels. You had to, when you died, there were like, committees basically that had swords, and, they would ask you questions, and if you came up with the wrong answer, they would crush your soul like a grape. And I was like, nah, I don't think that doesn't sound like fun. And we were all terrified because we had believed it. So obviously, if we had died at that point, I would have been a crushed grape, because I didn't know the right answers at that point, because Francois hadn't given them to me. And Seth went on, and you can find this stuff in some of the books where Seth is like very emotional about any time anyone comes to you and tells you that they have the answers. You turn around and run as fast as you can. Because, he didn't, this isn't how he ended it, but I took it to mean, you run as fast as you can, because they don't know jack, for them to even be able to say that, clearly they don't know what they're talking about. And, that's why I get uncomfortable still when people come around and say, well, I'm a Seth teacher. I can teach you the Seth material. And I'm like, well, Seth called himself an unteacher for a reason. And it really is. I think the relationship between you and the physical book, it's really kind of, you have a direct line. This is a telephone, the material is, really whatever you need to come from the material, you're going to create it. It's going to be there. I know I'm not the only one in the room who has, read the same book numerous times and thinks, yeah, I know what's in that book. And one day, something is kind of, there's something you're working on or thinking about, and you kind of pick up Seth material at random, and you open it up and you think, oh yeah, Seth material, Seth 101, there's nothing in there. And there's this incredible amount of pretty involved material there. And I've opened up the book and I'm like, I know that wasn't there the last time that I know it wasn't there. The book has changed. You close the book, the letters run around, and next time you sit back and you open up the book and you need a certain answer, you know, hi, Lawrence, you know, and you're like, wow, oh my God. I mean, I've had that numerous times with ESP power. People think, oh, ESP power, there's nothing in there. Well, as long as Seth is in there, there's something in there. It's, I don't think, you know, not that I'm biased or whatever, but for me, all of the Seth books are incredibly valuable. And again, for me, maybe because I'm a dinosaur, you know, Seth, when Seth said, read the books in order of publication, over and over and over again, he said that. And these last couple of years, I've been kind of trying to, you know, bite my tongue when people go, you know, come to, you know, send me an email and said, you know, I just started reading the material and I bought the early sessions and I'm all ready to go. And I'm like, well, it's good that you bought the early sessions. Everybody should have the early sessions, but put them away. put them in a closet somewhere and pick up Seth material and then Seth Speaks and Personal Reality and on that way. Because without the foundation that the published book gives you, the early sessions is just gonna, you know, fly right over your head. And also the shock of opening up the early sessions and I forget what, it's like 12 pages of gibberish of you know, 12 pages of Ouija board, the kind of stuff that happens when I touch the Ouija board, you know, gobbledygook and whatnot. And, you know, it goes like that for a little while. And then out of nowhere, Seth is just full blast, you know, laying out this incredible stuff. And I look and I'm like, I am just so impressed that Jane and Rob didn't like run out of the room, you know, because it was like, wait a minute, a minute ago you were talking about Frank Watts, whatever, and, you know, and now all of a sudden you're talking about this incredibly detailed new way of looking at reality.
Well, Lawrence, I hate to interrupt, but since you're the only one in the room, to my knowledge, that actually attended the ESP classes or Jane's classes, could you talk a little bit about what particular classes after the initial time meant the most to you? Or did Seth address you particularly about an experience or two that you had? Or maybe get back on that track a little bit?
No, thank you. Please, that's why you're here. You know, once that string in the back of my head gets pulled, I okay, I'll tell these stories. You gotta.
Well, no, there's nothing wrong with your story.
I need a rudder, you know. And again, when people ask, what did I get from the material? It is a rudder. Guaranteed, without the material, I wouldn't be here. Well, I'd have nothing to be saying to you folks that you'd want to hear. But I'd be dead. I had you know, like a lot of people in the early 70s, I was searching for meaning and doing all of that spiritual stuff and reading Carlos Castaneda and taking lots of chemicals and reading Alan Watts and then taking a lot more chemicals, and there was a pattern growing there. And, you know, when I started reading Seth, the chemicals were a joke, because I got higher from reading the material than I ever got from, I can say that. I got, you know, an out-of-body trumps a ball of hashish any day of the week. But some of the classes that were that just stand out as that really stand out for me is sorry, local Bay Area people, but I had one, we had one class, and for some reason, I told the story about how my sister-in-law died in my arms, and I don't know how it came up, but Mary died of an overdose while I was holding her and smacking her, throwing water, trying to wake her up, and we were waiting for the ambulance to come, and my brother couldn't be in the house when they showed up because he was on parole. And if, he was found in a house where there were drugs, they'd put him back in prison. So I had to deal with all this stuff. And so at one point, I'm shaking Mary, I'm smacking her, throwing water in her face, I'm screaming, Mary, 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 come on, wake up. And I could feel her. And then at one moment, I was alone in the room. And, she was still breathing. She was still kind of, her body was still functioning to some degree. But I was alone in the room, and I knew it. And it was kind of tough. And I told the story in class, and I had bottled the whole thing up because I had to go and tell my brother and his son that Eddie, your wife is gone, and the kid, you've got no mom. And it still chokes me up, sorry. But I told the thing in class, and next thing I knew, I was sobbing. And Samari comes through. And Samari comes, they look at me, and they start singing this song. And then at one moment, it kind of started out where it was a Samari song, and it sounded like, there were multiple, it was like a bunch of people singing through Jane, which unfortunately doesn't really come across on the tapes, but sometimes during Samari you would hear in the song, and it really was like, you knew there was more than one voice coming out of her. Like there were times it was like a choir. And this one started out where there was a bunch of voices basically trying to get my attention. And then there was Mary, and she reached over and she kind of, patted me on the knee and looked at me, and I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that, I could feel, that was Mary. And she was smiling, she was glowing, and I just, inside, I could basically feel what she was saying. And she was saying, why are you sad? Here I am. I'm doing great. This place rocks. I'm having a great time. Don't be an idiot, And I kind of like, oh, well, okay. And the song went on for a while, but I'm not kidding you. From that moment on, I had absolutely no doubt whatsoever about the survival of the soul. I mean, after a couple of out of bodies, I was pretty sure, well, you know, there is no death, you know. But when Mary let me know that not only was there no death, there was like a party going on. And it was like, she was having a real good time. Now, I couldn't quite explain this to my brother. But he was like, well, okay, if you say she's okay, well, fine. You know, I just wished I could have made that clearer to him. But at any rate, that was pretty special. And just some of those times when, you know, Seth would come through. And there would be times Seth would come through and just kind of sit there. And there would be a conversation between the other class members. And I always knew. I was like, uh-huh. You know, I could feel, you know, he was pretty easy to feel. You know, when Seth came, it was just kind of, there was an effect on the camouflage. You know, it was just kind of, things got a little, it became a little more apparent that, you know, this stuff isn't real, it isn't solid. You know, Seth is, you know, Seth, and Seth actually, there were numerous times where Jane would be talking and you could feel Seth in the room. You knew he was gonna, you know, he was waiting for to make his grand entrance and pop in and, you know.
Didn't you guys bait him a little bit?
Oh, yeah, well, there was, actually, it was pretty much a contest at times. If, we had driven 250 miles up there, and being in a car with these particular people, and it was a challenge. And so when we got up there, we kind of really expected, you know, we expected something to happen. We expected Seth to come through. There were times Seth, you know, didn't come through, and they were great classes. A lot of the best stuff that happened up there that doesn't get, you know, talked about a whole lot was, you know, there were classes where, you know, Jane just kind of, you know, held court all night, and just this amazing stuff would come through. And
just a little aside on that, Richard Kendall transcribed, because they had not been transcribed before when it was just Jane. So a number of years ago, he transcribed those. So they actually, I believe, are at the library now. I think anyway. I have them, I know. So, but you're right. They were terrific. Jane had some wonderful things to say.
What?
Pardon me?
Papers you described. They exist at Sterling or some other library?
He's asking if they're in Sterling or some other library.
Oh, Sterling. Sorry.
That's the only place they are?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Although Rick may publish them at some time, I'm not sure, because there are tapes.
Yeah. What else? Yeah, the wig story. I don't want to tell the wig story.
No, but you know, would you tell the Civil War story?
Okay.
Or are you sick of that? Because I like that one.
Now you know I'm not going to get out of this room alive. Some of the Bay Area Seth folks will be laying in wait with lead pipes and whatever. But I'll do the Civil War guy actually, I can feel the Civil War guy tonight. When I was doing, while I was going to class, and this is one of the pieces I wrote for Sue's book, we had been doing a lot of reincarnational work We had been talking about reincarnation a lot in class, and I would get stuff in dreams and whatnot, little bits and pieces, but nothing really spectacular. And then one day, really, it was like a Thursday or something like that, and I got up. I'm getting ready to go to work. Shower, come out, and I'm just getting ready to shave, and I'm shaving, and all of a sudden, here's my face in the mirror, and behind me there's the bathroom wall, and I'm shaving, and all of a sudden, the bathroom wall in the mirror is gone, and there's the forest there. And I was like, well, this is interesting. Now, do I run out of the room screaming like, oh my God, I've gone crazy? Or do I go for a ride here? And I said, all right, I'll go for a ride. And then the face changed. And then I was in this forest. I was in this guy's head. And this was a Confederate soldier, I believe a lieutenant, and he was not a nice guy. And he really, really offended me. He really, really scared the bejesus out of me. And I did not like being in his head. I did not like looking out through this guy's eyes. Even at that moment, I knew, obviously, that this was some aspect of me. And even though it probably lasted probably 4 minutes or something like that, it felt like I was in there for, half hour or something like that. It was just time didn't mean it. Funny, time didn't mean a thing, And he was about to torture. He was threatening to torture this prisoner that they had, and he was talking about like cutting off this guy's digits and other pieces that you don't want anybody to cut off of you. And I just was like, oh my God. And I came up to class, and we started with, did anybody have any good dreams this week or any experiences? And I was like, well, I got a little one, and I told what had happened. And as I was telling it, I was kind of getting angry that that there was a part of me. I'm a kid. Maybe I was 23 when this happened, and I had a pony. I had hair I had hair, and it was down to the middle of my back, and I had burnt my draft card, and I was not a big war guy, and so I was talking about this guy and how creepy he was and how scary this guy was, and really focusing on the differences between me and this guy. And then Seth comes through, kind of booming at me, And he said, did it ever occur to you that while you were looking out through his eyes, that he was looking out through yours? And he was wondering where these thoughts of cowardness were coming from, because that's how he read who I was. And I was like, well, you can call me a lot of things, but coward? You know? I thought it was, you know, I thought everybody in that room, in the ESP class, were heroes in their own way. They were, I mean, not like Jane and Rob, but they were pioneers. It wasn't like now where, you know, there's a lot of people who talk about this stuff, who experience this stuff, and, you know, they're not, they don't feel like they're gonna get locked up for talking about this stuff. And when Seth said that, I kind of started to realize there was stuff I would be able to get from this guy, and that I would be able to give to him. And long story short, this guy had absolutely no problem trusting his energy. I mean, he created his reality, and he wasn't worried about the consequences. You know, he's like, I'm who I am. I'm in charge. I'm doing what's right. And if you don't like it, it means nothing to me that you don't like it. Whereas I was, you know, trying to make everybody happy, and I was afraid of my energy. I was afraid of, I was afraid of creating grief for someone. I was afraid of making the wrong move, the wrong decision, whatever. And this guy never, I don't think that ever crossed his mind. And over the years, he softened out a little bit, and I did learn to trust my energy. And oddly enough, I mean, I owe a whole lot of that to him. And through in other aspects of my life, he would pop up. You know, it was like, you know, the first time I went horseback riding, you know, I was astonishing. I was great. You know, I mean, it was just kind of like I knew everything there was to know about, you know, how to be on a horse and look astonishing, you know, and look really good, you know. And how does a guy from Whitestone, Queens know how to do that, you know? And at any rate, that I got from him. And then just recently, he's kind of popped up again. And I've been getting kind of an update as to, you know, what happened to him when he went home.
Yeah.
You know, when he went home back to Georgia or wherever the hell, you know, he had come from, there was nothing there. It was all gone. You know, he's burnt to the ground, you know. So he moved out west and got involved with the beef industry, which, again, I hardly eat beef. I feel, anytime I eat beef, I kind of feel guilty, you know. And here's this guy who probably had thousands of longhorns and drove them up, you know, to Kansas to sell to make his money back, and he did. And that also answered another question that I had for myself, which was, why do you love watching Westerns so much? You know, why do you so feel at home? And I still, for when I need to escape, you know, when I need a break, you know, life's getting too crazy or whatever, I'll pick up a Western. After the first 5 pages, I know how the damn thing's going to end, but that's not the point. You know, the point is, for 123 pages, you know, it's black and white, and they're good guys, they're bad guys. It's not complex, and you can pretty much pick out, you know, who the, you know, who's the good pretty gal, who's the bad pretty gal. I mean, all this stuff is kind of right there for you, and those guys don't make the mistakes that I make in real life. So that's the big secret, right? Since I can't do drugs, and I don't drink, you know, my weakness is Westerns written in the early 50s, so.
Well, Lawrence, I understand we're down to 10 minutes
Oh, boy,
left, maybe
okay.
9 now. So
let me think.
your most important
My most important?
message to all of us.
Okay, well, okay. Let me figure out
Send me $1 million doesn't come.
how to phrase this. I have lived most of my life studying the material. I still have, you know, I still have problems. My house has gone into foreclosure. I've got health issues, and it's okay. It's really okay. I don't freak out about it. I know, in my gut, I know that sooner or later, I usually, you know, I'll reach into the bottom of the hat and I'll pull out that rabbit, you know, and I'll find a way to make things work. And I cannot, I don't really have the words to explain how blessed my life has been because of the material. You know, the folks in this room you know, are one of the few places that I could say this and not get carted off. But we are so lucky. We are so blessed to have what we have now. You know, besides the published, the books that were meant for publication, and of course the early sessions and personal sessions were also meant for publication, but in a slightly different way. I think we're looking at 41 books or something like that at this point.
A lot of books, yeah.
And it cracks me up when I get on Facebook and I see people freaking out because they think there's like a secret stash somewhere of more and more and more and more books, and I'm like, you haven't read those 40 books yet. You can't fool me, you know? I said, when you get those 40 books under your belt and you know those inside and out, you're not going to need a 42nd book, you know? And we all, at some point, we all realize that as we grow and we change, the books grow and change. So it's like, you know, again, I've been reading, I'm not bragging, but I've been reading this stuff since 1972, and I can go back and I can pick up Seth material and find stuff in there that I never saw before. And I wasn't really kidding when I said, you know, the type moves around when we're not looking. And
Seth wrote for many levels.
Yeah.
At one time, so.
And it's one other thing I want to point out. We have an advantage that Jane and Rob didn't have. They didn't have all the material like we have. You know, people talk sometimes about, well, why didn't she do this, or why didn't they do that, or whatever. And I'm like, well, Sue hadn't written her index yet. You know, they didn't know to look up in, you know, where to look to find the answer for that stuff, because they hadn't channeled it yet. They hadn't created it yet. We are blessed beyond belief. You know, I mean, it's, you know, when Seth talks about we've been given the gifts of the gods, that we create our reality, and you know, when you sit back and you really, really think about what that means, it's just jaw-dropping. It's frightening, and it's the most beautiful, exciting thing in the world at the same time. It's I had the honor, I had the privilege at SethNet 97 to stand up in front of 400 people with tears in my eyes and tell Rob basically how much I loved him, how grateful I was for what he had done, for what Jane had done. And you know, I cried, he cried. You know, it's just, I'm losing it, but here, I mean, you know, it's, again, besides us being blessed with the material itself, we're also blessed with this family that a lot of us don't really quite understand how important that family is, how strong some of these bonds are, and not just Samari, you know, all the families. I happen to be a little biased about the Samari part, but I'm telling you all, you picked a really great time to be alive, and you picked a really good time to be able to read. And as that stuff becomes more available in the cloud, or you know, some of my dear friends keep talking to me about you know, having all, you know, holding up these little machines and saying, you know, I have almost all of the books in here. And I'm like, you know, that's just not fair. Yeah, well, I would have to carry a backpack that would snap me in half, you know, to carry all of my books. And but I'm a technophobe, and that's probably okay. That well, at any rate, it's. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. It's the shit. It's the best. It's having the material in your life is just this magical, wonderful thing. And if I'm any help at all to inspire or scare, I hope I don't scare anybody away, but I hope to inspire people to say, you know, look, I mean, I was this close to the edge when I found the material, and the material completely turned me around, and has helped me numerous times. And even though there were a couple of times in my life where I needed, I kind of needed a vacation, a couple of years where I just wanted to, just be a redneck and, drive a pickup truck and drink a lot and not think about the material, But it doesn't work that way, and at some point, you turn around to one of your redneck friends and you go, well, why are you creating that? And they, what? And then you realize, well, this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to find my family and find some Seth readers and, go home, be with the people that I'm supposed to be with. And
here we are.
That's it. Here we are.